Okay. And let's see what, F, what? Function.
Hey, you only have me for 2 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Function what? What do I do
There
to?
should be a picture of it. There should be like two monitors on it.
Picture of two, oh, that one? Okay, function. Okay.
So for questions, my suggestion is that people use the wireless mics.
Okay, good. Yes,
That way we
wireless
get them on
mics.
tape.
Okay. We've only got Eric for 2 minutes. I'm just trying to bring up my spy improv here. I was sound asleep. She had just stepped naked under a waterfall when the phone rang. It was very disappointing. I said, where the fuck is the phone coming from? Okay, view. Slideshow. All right, Eric, we'll make this real quick. It's been a real honor to be part of this. Win Schwartau recommended me, and for some reason he decided I should be the man in black with sunglasses. But truly, from the heart, it has been an honor. It's been my good fortune to be associated with this group, with HackTick, and I'm an elected member of Hackers in Silicon Valley, which you'll see a slide of in a minute. I know that doesn't look like me down in the right-hand corner. You can see RenderMan. But anyway, Eric, come on up here. Let me just give you these things, none of which has any kind of bug cam, whatever. This is a genuine Bobby hat.
Cool. Well, that's what I needed.
And
My life is complete now. This is...
no, it's not complete
Well,
yet. This is a British cattle prod.
I felt that. It's going
Now,
to be an interesting night ahead.
I was going to give you a shower cap from the hotel for the waterboarding part, but this is the CIA tickler, okay? And when it's not being used to tickle people, you can use it as a back scratcher. And I couldn't figure out whether you were left-handed or right-handed, so it says E2600 here, and it really does work. It saved my life. Since my wife doesn't scratch my back, this is it. And then last but not least, one of 12. One of 12 only lifetime awards for open source intelligence leadership. You've been a kindred spirit. You know, this is really something. All right, go beat the shit out of somebody.
You guys know Robert was our very first speaker at our very first Hope. It was incredible, and we chose him because he was just such a fascinating person. Felt nothing would be better to lead off our conferences with someone of his caliber. And interestingly enough, we played a recording of Jello Biafra right before we went into his speech. We had no idea Jello Biafra himself would actually come to one of our conferences later and keep coming afterwards. So it's been an amazing trip, and continues to be amazing, and tonight's going to be amazing. Thanks.
Well, I don't know about amazing, but you are definitely... Keystone Cops here. All right, go, do your thing. Well, I'm sorry that we didn't start at 10, because I really feel that you guys are all getting so elderly now that early hours are better. But in any event, I just wanted to start by showing you a few slides. Oh, that's Eric. I love it. I sent it to my kid. And that's the medal. And it says E2600 down there. And so, how many of you have not seen me before? Oh, not many. Okay, you're all here for a wild and crazy time. Okay, bring it on. God, village idiot and a war criminal. Bring it on. Somewhere in here I have to get power, because for 4 hours we're going to need it. So this is who I am for the 5 or 6 of you that haven't been here before. And this little preliminary slideshow won't take long. Okay. And a power strip. Wow. All right, enough of that. It's very interesting because I ended my conference this year also. Former sergeant, came to my house and asked for my support. He was appointed as Assistant Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Open Source, primarily because he was the only one who showed up at the congressional hearing. I was sailing. I had my priorities straight. And Congressman Simmons was believed to be the person who was coming back. He wasn't. So anyway, this guy made me two promises. He says, look, you're the father of open source. I'll keep you in the loop, and I will not create a competing conference. Please support my nomination. And I did. Silly me. A little shit broke both promises inside of 30 days. So I ended my conference, but in fact, I'm grateful to him, just like I'm grateful to Dick Cheney. You know, Dick Cheney is the silver lining, and if I had the money, I'd be making these wonderful T-shirts that said, God bless Dick Cheney, with his face and a sneer on the front, and then on the back it would say, Enema of the Republic. You know, the fact is, the guy is the flush we needed. And I want to tell you, oh, by the way, I think they're still selling this book out there. I made a bad call. I should have realized from my own kids that you guys are the digital generation. You don't like hard copy books that much. But please buy this book. It's free online. I brought 120 copies. There's still another 60 or 70 copies out there. I don't want to drive them back, but I did drive, so it's no hassle if I have to drive them back. They're at half price. They're a collector's item, and this is the future. If I were to do it over, I would have brought a case of each book, but I wasn't here to sell my books. I was here to sell the future. And each book comes with a golden candle pin. And I have a publisher's preface and 2 chapters, but the smartest thing I ever did with this book was get out of the way of the editor. He was originally the junior editor to me, and I had organized the first 30 or 40 authors with help from Tom Atlee and so forth. And I realized that this guy who's a PhD in Canada, I realized that he was so far ahead of me that I ought to just get out of his way, and I did, and he doubled the value of the book virtually overnight, to include recruiting Yochai Benkler from Harvard, who's the author of Wealth of Networks, and the recently retired Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin, the Right Honorable Paul Martin. So as a PhD student, he now has a book that is better than anything any of his professors have ever done. And that's cool. I like that. Before we all begin, everything is free on both my websites. And these are some highlights, and you can get this briefing with these active URLs also on my websites. And they'll give you some ideas for the future. This is my office. At least it was. I just rented it. We're all starting to see some real hard times here. And I've moved into a skunk works in Washington. And this office for the last several years has been the place from which I've read and reviewed Amazon books. And my reviews now are like a Cliff Notes. If you have to leave early, Amazon reviews have reached a critical mass. It's now possible to get an education without having to buy a book. And so if you want to do reading in any area at all, going through the books and going through and seeing what the top book is and everything, this is really good. These are my most recent purchases. I've had 1,281 reviews. I've got 74 Listmania lists, and so forth. So enjoy. There is another Hackers Conference. How many of you know about the other Hackers Conference? Okay. That's the adults out on the West Coast. Stuart Brand, Larry Page from Google. Do no evil, right? And a bunch of others. And these are the guys that started in the Homebrew Garage Club. These are the guys that actually created computers in the first place, as opposed to the freaks. And fiber optic. And is fiber optic here? Do we know this year? Oh, good. Okay, super. I tried to give them house arrest at my place instead of jail, but they wouldn't buy. This is why I care about the future. It's your son. 3 of them. Yes, please, don't disrupt. Okay? Now, key negative trends. Collapse of complex societies. Acts of man creating acts of God. The reason Katrina was so bad was because we've been paving over the floodplains for the last 100 years. This isn't an act of God. This is an act of man. Acceleration of Earth's demise. Changes that used to take 10,000 years now take 3. Shock capitalism. We continue to loot the earth. Dubai is the new Switzerland. Dick Cheney has 70 non-virgins waiting for him, although what they're going to do while he cross-dresses and tries on new lipstick, I do not know. Political corruption has ascended. Of the 44 dictators on the planet, 42 of them love to play in our new rendition sweepstakes. You all know what rendition means, right? That's kidnapping people off the streets and exporting them for torture. Key positive trends. Wealth of networks, fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, and I can talk about these, but I want you to ask the questions. Green mind, moral capitalism, democratic information. Information asymmetry is how we have been ruled by secrecy, and that's now ending. It's not there yet, but it's ending. Left hand of God, peer-to-peer people power. I love this new peer-to-peer college loans. That's awesome. That's the future. Neither candidate will do. Okay? Obama is a slick, lying motherfucker. House Negro. No different than Colin Powell, except that Colin Powell has substance. And if I were McCain and I were elected, I would ask Colin Powell back as Secretary of State. I'd say, or Vice President, but I'd say keep your integrity this time. Most of these well-meaning guys that betrayed us in the run-up to the war in Iraq, 935 documented lies, 25 documented high crimes and misdemeanors by Dick Cheney. Our general officers lost sight of the fact that their oath is to protect the Constitution, not the chain of command. These people all blew it. I mean, Shinseki should have kicked Paul Wolfowitz down the steps of Capitol Hill when he told Congress that General Shinseki doesn't know what he's doing. This is going to be, you know, flowers in the street. The war will pay for itself, and so forth. But Obama specifically comes from the south side of Chicago, which makes Tammany Hall looks like Cinderella. And he has been very corrupt, and he also is a liar. He was raised as a Muslim, and so on and so forth. Now, John McCain, God bless him, for all of the honorable things that he's done, he ended up having to bite it and let George Bush win. And George Bush didn't win, actually. I mean, he stole the election in Florida, where Al Gore lost his balls, and he then stole it again in Ohio, where the Republican Secretary of State put all the good machines in the rich districts that loved Bush, or in the districts that loved Bush, and he had people of color standing for 7 hours in line to vote. And in some audits, they found that all votes for Kerry, for some reason, weren't even counted at all. Not that I would have liked Kerry. I think in retrospect, Bush-Cheney is a lot better than Kerry, because the devil is a lot better than a placebo when you're up against it. So, Bloomberg will probably not run for president, although he's still holding his cards close to his chest. But he'd be an idiot to run for president, plus he can't do what I do. He simply doesn't read enough. So somewhere in here, we need to get somebody like me, not necessarily me, and when I say me, I mean me as a stand-in for we the people, this wisdom of the crowds, the common sense of everybody. These two clowns have no idea what they're doing. They're just working with these stupid little policy sound bites, none of which are backed up by a balanced budget. There are 4 reforms that this nation needs. We need intelligence reform, which means we need to get public intelligence in the public interest and stop going with the default to secrecy. We need national security reform, which is full of fraud. It's cheaper to wage peace, educate all. Thomas Jefferson said a nation's best defense is an educated citizenry. Well, all across this nation, what we have is little fiefdoms, where the guys in the city council and the Rotaries Club and so forth sell public land and public airwaves and public privileges and public tax exemptions to corporations, and at the same time don't invest in education and welfare and health, so that they're in essence creating perpetual generations of slaves. White slaves, brown slaves, all color slaves. We need a nonpartisan, reality-based budget. I can eliminate Medicare unfunded deficiencies overnight just by eliminating the legislatively mandated proscription, that means forbidding, of government negotiation with the farmers. And finally, we need to demand electoral reform. And just very quickly on that, and I'll end these prepared remarks in about 5 minutes. This is not rocket science. The poor who rely on buses and cannot afford to miss work will generally not be able to vote on a Tuesday. This whole system is designed to keep the poor from voting, apart from gerrymandering. Honest, open debates. The League of Women Voters was fired from the debate business because they dared to suggest that they should be able to ask questions that were not provided to the candidates in advance, and they dared to suggest that they should be allowed to bring in third, fourth, and fifth parties. So the Republican and Democratic parties, both of which are intensely corrupt and a mirror of one another, basically said, okay, we're going to create a presidential debate commission so we can keep a monopoly on a presidential debate. And this is terribly, terribly wrong. Finally, cabinet-level debates. America's too complicated to be run by one white or one half-white man and his cronies. We need to demand that they appoint justice, state, and defense, and that these people participate in debates and have a balanced budget that they talk about. I'm now the intelligence officer for Reuniting America and the Citizens Summit, and our goal is to have a People's Cabinet and a balanced budget put in place by the 1st of October, I hope, and challenge these two clowns to match what we, the people, can do by ourselves, just using open sources and common sense. And finally, an instant runoff. And many of these ideas are in Ralph Nader's book. Ralph is a spoiler because he doesn't play well with others. That's unfortunate. And I really like Ron Paul. I really like Dennis Kucinich, who's the only guy short enough to be qualified to be vice president to Obama. And then finally, prior to November 2009, full and balanced representation. I mean, in any given state, all of the libertarians should be counted as a libertarian bloc, and then tightly drawn districts in those instances where there is no libertarian resident can have one imported. But the whole idea here is that on the one hand, you count the full spectrum of political parties across the state, you end the winner-take-all system in the state legislature as well as the national, and then finally full public funding of diverse candidates. We do have to get the money out. Now there's two ways to get the money out. Way number one is to legislate against it. Way number two is to outspend them. And you'll see a slide, maybe you won't see a slide on that. It's in my other brief. Let's do the math. The Republicans figured out in the late 1980s that they could buy the entire U.S. government from schoolhouse to White House for $300 million a year. And that's the plan they executed. That's the plan that gave us Newt Gingrich and the contract with America. So, $500 million. Let's see. Divided by 25 million citizens out of 200 million, that's $500 million. Or $100 by 5 million citizens, that's $500 million. Okay? Where we have failed is we have failed to create a political action committee for we the people. We have ACLU, we have all these little, niche groups, fragmented. We failed to create a political action committee for we the people. And finally, no legislation or budget allocation without prior notification. Now, this is reality. We are spending in the United States, without counting the supplemental, $750 to $800 billion a year on waging war. And the rest of the world combined with us totals $1.3 trillion. The 5 biggest offenders with respect to the proliferation of nuclear, chemical, biological weapons as well as small arms are the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. The United States sells 5 times more weapons than Russia does, and 3 times more than the United Kingdom does. And China is virtually inconsequential because China is waging peace, and I hope you ask me about that. China is kicking our ass in both information warfare, electronic warfare, and in waging peace. There's $3 trillion a year being spent around the world, purportedly, on war, on tax-exempt nonprofits, which are not really giving to all, they're just a cover for action. If you read Confessions of an Economic Hitman, it's great. They have these quasi-religious groups that go in and give the natives stuff that gives them diarrhea so they'll move off the mountain with the gold. There's an amazing synergy of crime between the Vatican, the mafia, organized crime overseas, U.S. corporations, the U.S. government, and selected elements of other foreign governments. We don't lack for money. We lack for honest, informed decision-making. So our deal, if we the people were to become mobilized, is to ask Senators Obama and McCain, gentlemen, if you really want to be qualified to run for president, to be elected president, then why are you, as a member of the Senate, not introducing electoral reform, which is the most fundamental restoration of the rights of the individual citizen in America? Why are you not willing to announce at least 3 cabinet positions? Why are you not willing to post a balanced budget online by 1 October? Why are you not willing to acknowledge the 10 high-level threats to humanity identified by Lieutenant General Brent Scowcroft and the other members of the high-level threat panel? Why are you not willing to recognize that there are 12 policies from agriculture through water that must be managed as a whole? It makes no sense to use water we don't have to grow grain we don't need to create ethanol, which uses 1,400 liters of water per gallon to create. This is not rocket science, okay? And I will, by the way, tell you that Washington knew everything it needed to know in 1975 through 79 with Senate hearings on peak oil and so forth, and they basically decided to pass the buck forward. And so the reason we're being screwed over today is because they decided to keep the money coming from Exxon and others and to keep the proles happy with cheap gas. Exxon did not earn $40 billion in profit this year. For every gallon of gas for which we pay $4, Exxon externalizes $12 in costs to the climate, to the planet, to future generations. Okay? So basically, Exxon is being allowed to steal from the future. They're being allowed to destroy the planet and not be held accountable for it. And finally, acknowledge the urgency of an Earth game, because nothing we do matters unless we create something that Brazil, China, India, Indonesia, Iran, Russia, Venezuela, and wildcards like the Congo can emulate. Now, I don't think I want to spend too much time on this. I just want you to know that they're there. For each of the 10 threats, I have a slide that describes the nature of the threat. Very, very simple. Other atrocities, child labor, child prostitution, by name kidnapping, murder for body parts, and so forth. For each of the policies, there's some really basic things that we can do, like in the economy, end CEO greed, $10 minimum wage, full employment, local supply chain, education, justice, pardon all marijuana offenders. We've created a prison system based on marijuana. Wind down a prison slave complex. Eliminate corporate personality. 8 challengers, all very, very serious. And finally, there are 4 methods: balanced budget, sustainable design, Earth game, true costs. I see the day coming when you can point your handheld at a barcode and it will tell you in detail whether or not that meets your social values and how much water is in that, how much sweatshop labor, how much tax avoidance, and so forth. Ultimately, I believe that boycotts and citizen action, citizen decision-making will in fact change the marketplace. This is my next book on peace intelligence, also to be without my name on the cover. And this is my last slide. So, questions? And please use the microphone. The fun begins. I can't see the mic, so please just be on the mic, and if you ask a really stupid question, I'll take you out back and beat the shit out of you. But otherwise, I will do my very best to answer any questions. This is a no-holds-barred, no-bullshit Q&A. Is there a question?
1,
No.
2, 3,
Go ahead.
4. I was just wondering.
Oh, go ahead.
You go.
No. Gentlemen first.
All right, the left has it. Left goes, then right.
All righty.
He's actually the right, you know, but I'm manipulating things. Okay, go on.
When do you think the United States will ever move to a honest money system? In other words, government money versus corporation money, which funds all the bullshit that occurs?
Yeah. That's a great question. I mean, most people don't realize that the Federal Reserve is not part of the federal government. The Federal Reserve is a front for the central banks. And both Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln were assassinated conveniently when they were about to start, and John F. Kennedy, not Andrew Jackson, Lincoln and Kennedy were assassinated when both were thinking about going precisely in that direction. The Constitution calls for the U.S. government to be able to print money with the full faith and credit of the American people. And we managed to avoid this central bank bullshit until about 1935. When we got sucked into it, and then, of course, the Civil War was funded by Europe on both sides as part of creating this lending debt cycle with the government. I think it's not going to happen until we, the people, get very, very angry and demand it of our candidates as we... And in fact, you know, when I say the candidates are irrelevant, what I mean by that is all candidates have been irrelevant up to this point, and in large part because even a totally honest congressman, by the time he gets to Washington, he learns two things. The first thing he learns is that he's got to campaign every day for money, and only corporations will give him money under these circumstances. And two, there's something called party line corruption, which is that if you don't vote the party line in Congress, you don't get the nice office and the extra staff. And so we've really undermined our democracy considerably by the manner in which we've implemented so-called representational democracy. The other thing that's happening, apart from the fact that we need to kill the central bank and get rid of the whole concept of borrowing, if it were me, I'd just default on the loans. Sorry about that.
True.
Misunderstanding.
They've stolen it all anyway.
What's that? Yeah, exactly. Well, not only have they stolen it all, the ultimate cold call, which Mike Rupert talks about in Crossing the Rubicon, the chairman of the SEC had the balls to go down to Colombia, set a meeting up with the FARC and say, would you please invest your drug liquidity with us on Wall Street? I mean, this is a documented trip that this guy made. Okay? I mean, brazen. What you got to admire in a way. Actually, Afghanistan, which under the U.S. has gone from 0 to 80% of all heroin production in the United States, what happens is that under U.S. direction, now the Afghan poppies go into Pakistan, where General Musharraf's factories turn it into number 4 heroin. We've basically made drug money the liquidity that Wall Street needs. And you don't hear anybody talking about a decline in drug stocks. They're doing just fine. The other side of money is open money, and I urge you to look at that. What's happening now is that we're moving more and more toward a barter economy in many places. And there are a number of wonderful books, but one of them in particular that I recollect is called Off the Books, The Urban Economy. And it's where really poor people live a life of dignity by trading home-cooked meals for car repairs and things like that. It's an off-the-books economy. Our money system right now is completely dysfunctional. It's fraudulent. It's fraudulent because it's not tied to value. The reason we're having a stock crash is because we allowed derivatives to go nuts. Instead of borrowing money on a house and there was a direct relationship between the loan and the house, we allowed people to start hedging and deriving and all of this stuff, and it's terrible. So the long and the short answer is we were sucked into making a huge mistake because we, the people, took our eye off the ball. We allowed our government to misrepresent us, and now, bless the Internet, although there's a book called The Future of the Internet and How to Stop It, you know, I'm very, very concerned about DRM and these tethered devices and so forth, which is one reason I don't own an iPhone. We need to break the backs of all these tethered devices, which is where hackers come in. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. It
Quick
seems
follow-up.
Well, really, it's education.
We've got 4 hours.
Oh, good.
He can
good,
wait.
good. All right. Have you? I don't know if you've read an excellent reference, "Creature from Jekyll Island."
No, I have not. No, I have not.
Most publishers obviously wouldn't touch it, so he had to create his own publishing company. But it's got tons of excellent references, and it shows, of course, as you mentioned, how dishonest our money system is and how it impoverishes, of course, the entire American populace for the behest of these disgusting
No,
bankers.
you're right. I mean, it's really a whole cultural shift. It's rule by scarcity and rule by secrecy. In an abundant society, it's a gift economy.
Right.
And your prestige, as in the hackers world, as in the open source world, comes from what you give, not what you take.
Would you encourage people then not following the 16th Amendment, which was never ratified?
What's the 16th Amendment?
Income tax, which is illegal and unconstitutional,
Ah.
according to Article 1, Section 2, 9, 8,
Wait,
and
there's
10.
a lot to be said for that. There's also a lot to be said for the 27 secessionist movements that exist. How many of you knew that there were 27 secessionist movements? Okay, I mean, Vermont being the strongest and most reasonable. And then you've got Oregon and so forth. Right now, unfortunately, we're trapped in a pyramidal system. And, I mean, for example, the right to bear arms is a fundamental right. And this may sound corny, but I take my right to bear arms, my most recent illustration was in The Patriot, where the kid walks into the church and says, "We're calling up the militia." And they basically grab their guns and go. They don't wear any goddamn uniforms. They're not part of the National Guard. They're not part of some structured, organized militia. They're citizens with guns and an attitude. Okay? That's the militia. And unfortunately, we've allowed ourselves to give up that right to bear arms at the same time that we've allowed ourselves to give up our right to print our own money and not be indebted to banks in Europe and actually Australia also now. Finally, we've given up our right to demand that income tax not be applied. And even worse than income tax is how the money is spent. I mean, Davy Crockett was lectured by a guy who said, "It's not your money to give," when Davy Crockett approved this $20,000 gift or whatever. Right now, we have a Congress that is wasting two-thirds of the money that we pay. And I think to kind of come to a long-about answer to your question, and we're going to have to stop there whether you like it or not, is transparency is going to be the key here. True costs and illuminating. For example, in every small town across America, I'd like to see a little hacker cell or a little cell of independent citizen Minutemen who basically every time a deal is cut with a corporation, they illuminate who got what, when, where. Okay? And they highlight all of this stuff. And you guys can do this. Now, coming over here, sir.
I was just wondering if you'd heard about some of the newer early voting laws, such as the one in Tennessee, which allows the citizenry to vote X days before an election until X minus N days before an election. Also, other states have certain provisions for absentee voting before it happens for pretty loose reasons. I know in Kentucky, where I'm from, you don't have to prove a reason that you're going to be out. You're just going to have, you just can say, "I'll be on vacation," and they'll hand you a ballot. So do you know about any of this?
No, on balance, I favor flexibility. I don't favor electronics, obviously. And I think hackers have rendered a real service in hacking Diebold. I mean, this is a guy who stood up at a Republican fundraiser prior to 2004 and said eye to eye with the next president, "I'm going to deliver this election to you." You know, and they're documented cases. No, on balance, I favor anything that makes it possible to vote, but at the same time, there is this relationship between voting and education and civic duty and all of these other things that we've allowed to atrophy. There's a guy named Lionel, and any book I mention, generally I've reviewed it, and you don't have to buy it, just read my review. But there's a book by Lionel Tiger called The Manufacture of Evil. And one of the things he talks about is how the industrial era broke the connection of kinship. It broke the trust connection between people in cottage industries, eat local, home rule, all of that stuff, and people became commoditized. They became a good. And that's why globalization is so bad, because free trade is completely different from fair trade. I mean, fair trade is minimum wages everywhere, fair labor standards, the whole nine yards. Free trade is fuck the American people. We're going to go for the lowest common cost, and we're not going to count the cost of oil for bringing a $3 piece of crap from China to sell for $6 by Walmart. So you've got some real issues there. Voting is part of it. We have to mobilize. We have to really get pissed off. And it may take another 3 to 7 years. It may take till 2012. But I am hoping that this next administration will be the first administration in which the President is, since I told you I didn't want the 100, I want the system to have the 100. This isn't about me. This is about us. Okay, go on. What's your question?
Maybe I'm naive. It doesn't, well, first of all, even if it's hard to get 5 million people to donate $100.
It's not. We're just not organized to do it.
Robert, Mr. Steele, it costs $12.50 to register a domain name. Call it the People's Political Action Committee, PPAC. Who's going to start this? How do we, make this move forward?
Well, Jim Turner, who is Ralph Nader's second employee, has already created the Transpartisan People's Trust as a Transpartisan People's Bank to start taking the money. Where we've been delayed is Reuniting America has, for the last several years, focused on leadership education. And they've been focused on, and I thank you for the question, it's a good one. They focused on bringing the leaders from left to right, ACLU to Norquist and others together. And what we've discovered is that from left to right, we have certain common grounds, among them civil liberties. From left to right, we're all equally concerned about civil liberties. We're all equally concerned about the budget deficit. We're all equally concerned about the fact that we're just losing ground internationally overall. I'm hoping that the Citizens Summit, which is designed to take place in Chicago on Lincoln's birthday, 2009, that the Citizens Summit will be the first shot in creating a Citizens Political Action Committee, and at every level. I mean, one of the beautiful things about Yochai Benkler's book, The Wealth of Networks, by the way, how many people are standing in line for each line?
3 versus 4. 3 or 4.
Okay, all right. I'm going to try and go fast. And what I'd like to do is go real short and fast in the first hour, and then half of you can leave, and then in the second hour we'll start stretching, and then the other half of you can leave, and then the 2 people that are left will sit here and talk for a couple of hours. Okay? So I want to be good to all of you. And also, we can make this conventional show and tell, or we can make this really wild and crazy and talk about, spy stuff, which is what used to keep people glued to their seats.
February 9th, Lincoln's...
well, I think it's like the 20th, but February sometime in Chicago, there's a Citizen Summit. If you go to citizensummit.us, or if you go to reunitingamerica.org, you'll find it. And I'll be ginning some stuff up, but I'm certainly hoping to have a convergence of hackers there, because the ultimate hack in this century is getting our government back. Okay.
You've touched a little bit about your thoughts on Ralph Nader. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on some of the third-party presidential candidates this fall, like Cynthia McKinney and Bob Barr, and, of course, Ralph Nader. That's all.
Okay, it's a very good question. I mean, the system is stacked against third parties. For example, states have been allowed by the Supreme Court to rule that independents do not have a right to be invited to the debates, even independents who are running on a legitimate slate. So the system is totally hosed, and the only reason it's allowed to remain hosed is because the courts are being allowed to trump the people. And we really need to ramp up this whole thing. Now, unfortunately, partly because third-party candidacies are so irrelevant now, the third-party candidates are largely non-entities. Is McKinney that deep black woman?
Yeah, she used
Right.
to actually be a Democrat, and Bob Barr used to be a Republican. Also, Mike Gravel,
Right,
who was
yeah,
running
you
in
know,
the
these are-
Democratic, went to the Libertarian Party.
I don't believe much in third parties of convenience. I do believe in libertarians. I do believe in Greens. And unfortunately, the Greens, the Libertarians, and the Reforms seem to have staffs whose I'm trying to think of an alternative for fucked up. I mean, the staffs of these people are so fucked up, they're exceeded only by the fucked upnesses of Obama and McCain staffs. You know, these staffs are all these insular people who are focused on tactical, get out the vote, whatever it takes. There isn't a single one of them that can do what I have done in 15 minutes, which is review the 10 threats, the 12 policies, the 8 challengers, and then in my brief earlier this morning, there was actually a strategy and operational implementation through the internet and so forth. This is not rocket science. The problem is this massive disconnect between what we know, what we can know, what we need to say, and what they think they need to say in order to get elected. And so the whole system is just, it's terrible. I mean, you look at McCain and Obama. I mean, I think Obama's going to have his Dukakis moment while he's traveling. You know, he's going to have big flappy ears under some fighter pilot thing, and it's over. And I'll tell you right up front, I mean, I'm very concerned about our lack of choice, but the only reason that I support McCain rather than Obama is because the next administration is going to have to take the Pentagon off the public tit, and is going to have to tell the Pentagon, you're going to have to make do with 1/3 of the dollars that you've had in the past. And I guarantee you Obama doesn't have the balls or the spine or the brains to do that, and McCain does. However, McCain lacks the staff and the environment. I mean, he's got Brent Scowcroft and Colin Powell and Ralph Peters, a good friend, but McCain right now does not have a staff structure to do something as simple as talk to David Walker, who's now parked in New York. David Walker is the Comptroller General of the United States, who in July 2007 told Congress we're bankrupt as a nation. And Senators McCain and Obama ignored the Comptroller General of the United States. And now Peter Peterson, who wrote the book Running on Empty, Why Our Two Parties Are Betraying America and What to Do About It, he's the former chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations, he is now funding David Walker as the Citizens Budget Office. And so David Walker's job is to communicate to the citizens, and so far he's done a really shitty job. He's just been kind of hanging back, collecting his paycheck. But I'm hoping that sometime in the next couple of months, David Walker will come out with a balanced budget that addresses the 10 threats and addresses the 12 policies in harmony. What no one else is doing is creating the Earth Game model that can then be migrated to China. For example, it's idiocy for India to be creating cars even if they only cost $2,500. India should be going toward mid-sized cities with high-speed rail and on and off mini cars and rental, you know, kind of the zip car concept. And we need to dramatically accelerate what the Dutch are doing with bicycles and bike trails and bikes on and off of trains and all of this shit. This is common sense. But unfortunately, India, apart from having 36 wars going on at any one time within itself, India is really multiple Indias. It's the IT India, which is a very small, exclusive, maybe 3% of the country. And then it's the impoverished farming India, where 2,000 farmers a year commit suicide over debt and drought and so forth. So let me stop with that and go to whoever's next. Is that over here? Who's next?
Over here.
All right, self-control, please, because I'm blind.
Okay, so I'd like to go back to the Nixon administration and Bob Butts, who was the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture, and he put into place a lot of the programs that is basically our corn problem, you know, where everything we have is, you know, 70% corn. And so my point is, how do we, if we go back to the less productive, older form of agriculture, are we going to have enough food to feed everybody in the world?
That's a wonderful question. Gosh, you can dissect that at so many levels. Let's start with the fact that we have an industrial society that is based on petroleum, which produces plastic, which requires chlorine, which is, book title, Pandora's Poison. I drove through Iowa, and I was looking at the whole corn thing, and I didn't realize it, but Iowa has to import corn for people to eat, because Iowa is growing corn to be force-fed to cattle, whose shit is now a byproduct in spinach. And All right. I mean, for those of us that are recovering alcoholics, what's the alternative? In fact, if anyone wants to hold hands afterwards, I'll stay for about 4 seconds. The whole issue of productivity is the point of your question that I want to focus on. There are exactly 2 agricultural models that are actually sustainable. One is the Amish and the other is the Cuban. And the reason the Cuban model is sustainable is because we embargoed all of our pesticides. And Cuba went with a full employment model that was less productive in the total aggregate production, but in fact turned out to be much more fruitful. I think this whole move across America to eat local is a good one. I anticipate the day when we'll start tearing up strip malls and restoring local agricultural productivity. I anticipate the day when cities may even be abandoned if we don't find enough power fast enough, or portions of cities will be abandoned and turn into the Mayan ruins, By the way, there's a wonderful book called 1491, which talks about all the knowledge that the Mayans had about deep root farming. I mean, they were actually farming the Amazon. They had figured out how to make the Amazon do what they wanted without strip farming. So the whole issue of agricultural productivity is one that has to be considered in this larger context. For example, in India, a French company went in there, and in partnership with the Gamine guy, who's Nobel Prize winner, and rightly so, they created a nutritious yogurt in a disposable, biodegradable container that could be afforded by poor Indian mothers for their kids. And the whole model of capitalism is in the process of turning on its head. Right now we have immoral, predatory capitalism that is focused on the billion at the top who can afford to replace their Sub-Zero fridge every 3 years. Okay? An African refrigerator costs $2. It's a cement jar with a long neck, an air gap, another cement jar with a long neck, and buried in the ground it keeps meat fresh for 5 days. Costs $2. So this whole issue and C.K. Prahalad, who's one of a handful of people who have deeply influenced me, he wrote this book called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, and he points out that modern capitalism is based on not only the billion at the top, but on an infinite liberty to basically consume the earth and toxify the earth. I mean, there's a book called High-Tech Trash. There are many other books along these veins. So the 5 billion at the bottom, most interestingly, have 4 trillion a year. 1 trillion, 4 trillion. That's the future. And I gave an invited rant to Paul Allen's Interval Corporation back in '93 or '94. You can find it by looking for Godman and Interval and my name and OSS.net, and that'll narrow it down. But take him out and drop him off the side of the building. Okay, yeah, now that I'm a recovering alcoholic, it's no longer funny. And I say that because I've discovered that the more I say it, the stronger I feel. What we have here is we have a need to really understand that the future of the planet depends on full employment. It also depends on education. The best dollar invested in foreign aid is invested in the education of a woman. You educate a woman, she doesn't put up with the drunk asshole anymore. She finds a way to get a microloan. Yeah, no. God bless you. I mean, my own wife is a saint. I mean, she's put up with a lot of shit, which is one of the reasons why I got interested recently of the economics between whoredom and wifedom. And I'm kind of looking at that. Somehow I think the wives are not getting the better part of the deal, at least after year 5. So it's a fascinating world, and it's a world that I, honest to God, believe is rich in promise if groups like this take the tools that they have. And I personally am anti-Google. I know we've got a lot of Google spies in the audience, and some not so, somewhat more overt. Google was a good idea that went bad. There's 2 analytic reports which in combination will cost you $1,000, but you can read my book review. There's one book called The Google Legacy. I'm sorry, you know, I'm trying to help you. If I can't, no sweat, leave. The second book is called Google 2.0, The Calculating Predator. Now, Google is doing 2 things, one of which is really good, one of which is really bad. The really good is they've taken computational mathematics to a level that is out of this world. It's another planet, and it's quite spectacular. On the other hand, you've got a guy named Pierre Levy up in Canada who's creating the information economy meta-language, which has 2 digraphs and trigraphs for every word and concept across all languages, meaning that you will eventually have an automatic machine translation for the word dog or for the word beat or whatever. But where Google went wrong is in deciding that it could earn money by misrepresenting and deceiving people. And I had a slide yesterday which shows the universe of information, then it shows what search engines pull up, and then it shows what a programmable search engine pulls up. A programmable search engine shows you what someone else has paid for you to see. That's evil. And I like Larry and Sergey and Eric, but they're engineers, and engineers don't know shit about ethics. They really have lost it. And Vint Cerf is a personal friend. We've sushied together. And I tried to warn Vint and Larry Brilliant that they were being used as poster children for evil. And I think we really need to take that very seriously. The day that Cisco comes out with an application-oriented network at point of creation, the Googleplex dies. Okay? Right now, the Googleplex is depending on this very large atmosphere. And what the CEOs of IBM and Oracle and Microsoft and SAP and others, except Nokia, Nokia may end up being the next Google. They don't understand that Google is not search that generates advertising revenue. Google is this juggernaut of applications in the cloud. And people, you have to really understand their entire patent structure, which Steve Arnold, my virtual CTO, has done in Google 2.0. You have to understand their entire patent infrastructure, and you have to understand all of their little moves. You know, they kind of send out these little lifeboats, like they go into telecommunications and then pull back, they go into banking, pull back, they go into entertainment, pull back, they go into publishing, pull back. What people don't understand is those are exploratory things to test the concepts, and then once they know they work, they're holding back. Google can flick a bit and eliminate the financial, communications, entertainment, and publishing industries overnight. Okay? And the problem that I have with this, apart from their thinking that they can allow people with money to determine what people with brains see, the problem that I have with this, I've forgotten what the problem is that I have with this, but I have a problem with this. All right, next question.
I'm a bit perplexed by our lack of action through the atrocities of the last decade or however many years you want to go. So I'm curious about your thoughts of that, and if you think food is a big part of that, and if so, is there any place in any of your plans for food in that integration or that change?
Are you saying the atrocities like Darfur associated with starvation and migration and so forth?
No, with our government and with our experience in this country, and the effect that we have had on this world.
Well, that's an interesting point, because one of the things I've learned the hard way is that good people trapped in bad systems try to do good and end up doing great bad. I mean, our government is not evil at the personal level. It's really only evil in what it's allowed to do in our name. I mean, I'm stunned that we're not out burning tires in the streets. And in many ways, the internet has become a vent for people who would otherwise be out in the streets burning flags and tires and so forth. Food is a fundamental. And one of the problems that I have in the United States is this whole issue of obesity. I mean, I loved the, and no disrespect to any person who's heavy, because it's not your fault. I actually had I had a slide. I had a slide in my, you should go look up my, well, actually the health slide is not there. May I bring up the health slide? Let's do that. Let's talk about health and food for a minute. And anytime you guys want to take a bathroom break, please do. Generally, when I finish a picture, I go, and security clears the way, and then I come back. And this will just be very light and easygoing, and obviously, as you're bored, you can leave.
If I may make a comment.
Yeah, please.
We as Americans spent more money on health care last year than on food.
Well, that's a good comment. And PricewaterhouseCoopers had a study that came out recently. I've posted a copy at OSS.net, which says that 50% of our spending on health is waste. Okay, we have an industrial-era health system, and I'm rather proud of this slide because I created it, and I'm not a health expert. Okay, I created it after talking to a few people for 15 or 20 minutes. I love this. My son made this. For those of you that weren't in the other session, this is the world brain inside of the cosmos, and down there, the pig with lipstick. That's the U.S. intelligence community. That's in honor of Eric. You've seen that. I'll let you see this. Okay. Yeah, someone else did that. I love it. All right, let's leave this one up for a couple seconds. Can you read it in the back?
Yeah.
Okay. I am not making this up. Even worse than that, we have officers like at the National Ground Intelligence Center whose sole purpose in life is to fabricate data, manipulate data, to create justifications for weapon systems we don't need that we can't afford.
Yeah.
You know, what's going on here? This is my version of good thinking. All right, here's the slide I was talking about, and here's Google's programmable search engine. Evil. This is all on the internet. This is the how I want to spend $500 million. We can talk about that later. Oh, this is really cool. If you pull this slide down from my website, you can drill down. It's a PDF inside of a PowerPoint. And so it scales infinitely, and you can drill down to what my friend Dick Clavens and Brad Ashford have done, which is show how all of the sciences on the purple side are related to all the humanities. And you and I are at the intersection of cognitive science and collective intelligence emergent. But we already have a world brain. Screw Web 3.0 and Web 4.0. They're already here. What we need is human networks with low-level tools that are able to do sense-making on the fly. All of this Nova Spivak stuff, I love Novak. He's got a chapter in the book, which please buy it. I mean, I can drive the 4 boxes away, but they really are amazing, amazing collections of work. I'm building this. Okay, where are we here? This is the whole picture. Okay, I really like this slide. I mean, what does it say when, if you decide you want to have a 24/7 existence, you have to live on Twinkies? You know, there's something wrong with a society that doesn't give you better options. At the same time, there's something wrong with a society that has so many things inserted into foods and the atmosphere and so forth that you're essentially living in an unhealthy environment. I mean, there are some people that say that Alzheimer's is a misdiagnosed form of mad cow. And then finally, you have natural alternative remediation. And I mentioned this in the other session, but Dick Clavens, whose wife is very, very wealthy and who believes in alternative and natural medicine very much, he has acid reflux disease. And so he went to Western doctors, we got all kinds of things we can do. We could even have surgical intervention here and eliminate that. Then he went to a Chinese doctor and an Indian doctor, and they both said the same thing. Asshole, stop eating meat after 12 o'clock during the day and get off caffeine. End of acid reflux. Okay? So the knowledge that is available in natural alternative medicine is being deliberately repressed by Big Pharma. And finally, you have surgical and pharmaceutical intervention. Well, I'm actually developing a whole book. I may even publish it prior to my peace intelligence book on health intelligence. And one of the things you find out is that evidence-based medicine is the quickest way you can scare any surgeon, because most surgeries are not based on evidence. They're elective surgeries. And I like John Edwards, but he became a millionaire by putting good doctors out of business so that bad doctors could do more operations that were not needed on women. Okay? And so this whole thing, surgical remediation, but then on the positive side, surgical remediation opens up the whole idea of telemedicine. I mean, right now you've got homework help from India, where for $18 an hour you can get a PhD student walking your kid through math, which I certainly need because I have no clue beyond 2 + 2 = 6. And so you have telemedicine, you have medical tourism. Go to Thailand, have your heart fixed, get laid, come back, you know, it's good. And then you have pharmaceutical remediation, but pharmaceutical remediation, the drugs that we pay $600 for per unit, we can buy in Canada for $60, and that's as far as most of the world goes. I have a friend who's about to launch an initiative who spent the last 7 years inventorying costs of the top 75 drugs worldwide, and we have found that we can lower the Medicare cost in the United States to 1%. Instead of $600, instead of $60, we pay $6. Is that 1% of 600? Yes. Thank you. Okay, so 1%. 1%. I just have this vision of this giant dildo with thorns going up Big Pharma's ass. I mean, it's just so good.
On that note, is there
on that note, yes.
Is there a place in any of your plans for any of that sort of implementation?
Oh, yeah.
Could you enlighten us?
What's that?
Can you enlighten us?
I have a very complicated life.
I guess I ask because I think I'm very passionate about the effects of food on us, and I think it is really important for us to consider.
Well, I agree. And in fact, I wrote a book, or I actually put together a book trying to help Congressman Simmons get elected, and then his idiot staff didn't hand it out. I'm serious. I did a book called The Smart Nation Act, Public Intelligence in the Public Interest. And I published it at my own expense, sent 240 copies to Simmons' staff, and said, hand this out to every thought leader in his district. And 2 newspapers turned against him, not because he was a bad congressman, but because he didn't have any big ideas. He lost by 80 votes. Had those 240 books been handed out, he would have won by at least 50 votes. Anyway, healthy country, you know, Hans Morgenthau, Power Politics, have I got it right? Someone who was here in the 70s? The population is one of the most fundamental foundations for national power. And so we have had a whole series of administrations. In fact, there's something called NSSDM 2000, which was an attempt in the United States to have a population policy. It was an attempt to understand the demographics of aging, the demographics of immigration, how you want to manage your population so that you have a healthy, vibrant population with a good age and gender mix and all this. And it didn't pass for the same reason we don't have an industrial policy. An industrial policy would assure that not only do we have a strategic petroleum reserve, but we have the ability to convert from automobiles to tanks overnight. And we don't have that either. Food is fundamental. And Frances LaPaix Moore is one of my favorite people. She wrote a book called Diet for a Small Planet. The essence of that book is go vegetarian. And although I have myself never done that except in France, I went to Provence, France for a couple weeks. I was in this seminar, and they fed us vegetarian food for 2 weeks, and I loved it. It was great. I had absolutely zero withdrawal symptoms from meat or sausage or pork or anything else. It's possible to have a healthy diet that does not support mega farms of cattle and sheep and pigs and all this other stuff. So Diet for a Small Planet is very, very good. Frances LaPaix Moore has written other books since then, including her latest, Get a Grip. I recommend all the books by Frances LaPaix Moore. And so I would say to you that health and food are two of the fundamentals, and an enlightened president would have an agricultural secretary, an interior secretary. They might even have a food secretary. And then you have the whole issue of food security. I mean, our food security sucks. You know, FDA is never going to figure out where the salmonella came from. Exactly. There are too many sources. So I thank you for bringing up this whole issue of food. I think it's fundamental. You are what you eat in many ways, which is why I look younger this year. Next question.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you just started talking about health, because I had a bone to pick with you from your earlier talk. Just because you talked about alternative medicine and evidence-based medicine as if they weren't diametrically opposed. And that's always seemed to me definitionally that the notion of alternative medicine was that it's an alternative because there's no evidence for it. And the example that you used of not eating meat before bedtime, I mean, that's something that is not, you know, Chinese medicine, that's not non-Western medicine. That's just like proven evidence-based medicine that just so happened to be given by an alternative doctor. I mean, alternative medicine is, you know, energy zones in the body and sticking needles into them and things like that.
Well, we don't need to argue about semantics. And one thing I did say in my earlier thing is that we found that acupuncture actually is wonderful at pain remediation, which then allows other things to happen. So no, I'm not here to quibble with you about the terms, and I'm sure that this slide can be improved. But I take your point, and I can change this. But the whole idea here is that within the context of this slide, nobody is cataloging the true cost to society or the true cost to heal for all those things that are preventable and all those things that are not preventable. I mean, I have 3 sons in school, well, 2 sons in school, and the youngest is in elementary school, and a year does not go by when our whole world does not turn upside down because at least 6 mothers have kids with allergies to peanuts. And what we're starting to find out is that allergies are erupting from our food and drink and medical supply chains. FDA has no clue. And stuff is being approved and is just bad for us. So let's ask another question. In fact, I'm seeing it's 1:23. I'm thinking we should stop in 2 hours rather than 4.
5 stories.
Okay, 5 stories?
Vietnam, JFK. 5. Get a few more questions.
Okay, I have Vietnam, JFK, spy stories. What?
North American Union.
All right, I'll tell you what. I'll start with the first 3. Let's go with spy stories. Okay, most of you were here 2 years ago, right? So you know the 2 most important skills in spying? All right, the first one is listening. The second one is typing. Okay, for every hour of agent meeting, you've got 4 hours of typing. And if you're doing terrorist meetings, which I did, I was one of the first guys to do terrorists full-time, you have to tape record the session, and then you have to do a transcript yourself. You know, and that's a real pain in the ass. Well, no, it's like being a cop, you know. It's 90% boredom and 10% sheer terror. Okay, all right, pipe down, please. Other spy stories, I mean, I'm not going to violate any secrets. The best 2 books on spying are Alan Dulles, The Craft of Intelligence, and Miles Copeland, Without Cloak or Dagger. The problem with spying is that it's a facade. You can't be a good spy if you insist on going in and out of an embassy 5 times a day. If you're a junior officer who's spending more money than the political counselor. If you seem to have an unbridled schedule. Or when we go to steal a code book, everybody comes into the embassy at 5 o'clock at night for their evening briefing, and the gate guards, who are local nationals, call liaison, which employs them and says, hey, CIA's working tonight. And so Liaison puts out a couple of cars. They very quickly find out which target we're casing or which target we're actually going into after a year of casing. And then the next morning after we've stolen the code books, local Liaison goes into the ambassador and says, hey, CIA got your code books last night. And NSA pretends this really matters? You know, it's just unbelievable. Diplomatic pouches are fun. They're accompanied, unaccompanied. We can walk through walls. The way you walk through walls, except it gets harder when you've got humans or dogs. But the way you walk through walls is basically being able to get through any system. And digital systems are really giving them a problem because they're much, much more cumbersome. And much, you know, backups and so forth, especially webcam backups that are remotely monitored. Now you're in deep shit. And this whole Mission Impossible thing doesn't happen. John Perry Barlow, lyricist for the Grateful Dead, co-founder of EFF, I got him into CIA after my first conference. And he wrote an article in Forbes called Why Spy, I think it was. And he said, if you want to see the last vestiges of the Soviet Gulag, go to CIA. We're talking gray metal desks. We're talking a phone system of secure and unsecure phones so badly designed you can't tell which phone is ringing. Okay? I mean, it's with a tip of the hat to Nat at O'Reilly. He talks about open source as Darwinism and malware and proprietary software as intelligent design that's not so intelligent. Well, I got news for you. Our spies are clueless. We have occasional successes. Afghanistan was a success after a fashion, but only after Charlie Wilson forced CIA to do its job. And so there are issues there. I think on spying I'd like to answer 5 or 6 quick questions. So throw them out.
Have you read Legacy of Ashes?
Yes, Legacy of Ashes is an excellent book. I've reviewed it. By the way, it's unfortunate. And I swear this is not self-promotion, but if you want to read my review when it's been buried by hundreds of other reviews, I'm sorry, but you have to pick me as an interesting person. That's the way Amazon works. And someone else taught me this. If you pick me as an interesting person, then every time you look at a book, if I have reviewed it, my review pops to the top. And I write what are called summative reviews. And I'm one of the very few reviewers that also provides links to other books. So you can kind of follow a path here and read my reviews across all 300 or 400 intelligence books that I reviewed. I became an Amazon reviewer by accident. I had written 2 books, on intelligence, Spies and Secrecy in an Open World, and then The New Craft of Intelligence, Personal, Public, and Political. And each one had an annotated bibliography, and I loaded both one afternoon in April 2000, and I was instantly one of the top 1,000 Amazon reviewers because they just started out. And then over time I kind of got hooked. It's a business expense. I spend about $5,000 a year on books. And I just reviewed that 2600 thing, which is beautiful. That one I didn't buy since I own the originals, but I put a real good plug-in for it and tried to relate it to Stephen Levi's, Bruce Sterling's Hacker Crackdown, and Shirley Turkle's. How many of you have read Shirley Turkle's Computers and the Human Spirit, My Second Self? It's an awesome book. You owe it to yourself to get it and read it because it talks about the origins of hacking at MIT. And that's what prepared me emotionally in the late 1980s to understand hackers when I was first invited to speak here. I mean, I am very proud of myself for having understood that hackers are like astronauts. They have the right stuff. And I offered to keep Fiber Optic out of jail, but they thought I'd be worse than jail, so they wouldn't let them come. But anyway, so this is all good. Another question.
Industrial espionage.
What about espionage?
Industrial espionage.
All right, industrial espionage. You know, I was in France in 1993, and the French are very good at industrial espionage. In fact, most industrial espionage against the United States is carried out by its friends. Germany, France. Who? Oh, yeah, Israel. My God, promise. You know, I mean, the Americans are so stupid about the Israelis. Unfortunately, until Joe Lieberman leaves the Senate, that's going to continue to be the case. He is Israel's de facto real ambassador in the United States. And he was never a Democrat. He was a neocon penetration of the Democratic Party. And he's also a sanctimonious asshole. You know, I mean, the separation of church and state is supposed to apply to senatorial statements. And the invocation of God at every turn is just as bad as prayer meetings that are mandatory. Part of the problem, and I was in France in 1993, and I was at a competitive intelligence conference, and the head of the French steel industry stood up and he said, you know, we made a mistake. He said, we carried out, essentially, industrial espionage against the steel industry in the United States and elsewhere, but we completely missed the fact that plastics was coming up. And plastics ended up taking away the aftermarket parts for automobiles, and then it ended up becoming the primary source of parts for automobiles. And the lesson that I learned from that, and I put this into a 1994 lecture to the Association of Global Intelligence Specialists or something like that. You can find it by looking for Steel and AGSI, AGSI. The lesson that I learned from that is you have to cast a very wide net, and that you can't cast a very wide secret net. Industrial espionage is generally not worth it. And I was just doing some browsing, and there's an article in The Economist in which all U.S. and other manufacturers were asked where did they think their innovation was going to come from by the year 2012, 2013. And just like Business Week had a wonderful cover story in June of 2005, I think it was, the 20th of June, it had a cover story called The Power of Us. Lego got 1,600 engineering hours free from its customers, from devoted customers who said, hey, what we really need is something that does this. And, you know, that's money in the bank. General Zinni, and I've written, if you go to OSS.net, at the very top you'll see some shortcuts. And I've written the 2 seminal chapters on OSINT. One at the strategic level, one at the operational level. And at the strategic level, I quote General Tony Zinni, a Marine who was the commander-in-chief of CENTCOM right before the Bush administration. Zinni, as I and many others, was violently opposed to invading Iraq. And he is on record as saying that as commander-in-chief, only 4% of his information came from secret sources and methods. 80% came from open sources, and the other 16%, if he knew where to look, meaning which coalition partner to ask, came from open sources in direct contact, what we call kind of gray literature. So industrial espionage, in my view, is a massive waste of time most of the time. There may be occasions when it pays off, but the overall cost, risk, timeline, none of that really is worth it. And I've written an article for Forbes ASAP called, what's it called, Reinventing Intelligence. And I make the point that U.S. secret intelligence is inside out and upside down. It's inside out because we try to answer questions by stealing unilaterally, rather than beginning with what does everybody else already know. And it's upside down because we rely on satellites taking pictures. I mean, in Haiti and in Cuba, we would use satellites to take pictures of the boats being built on the beaches rather than sending someone down there with a digital camera. That makes no sense at all. And in fact, satellites are often wrong. It turns out satellites cannot predict the temperature on the ground because they were created to average the temperatures in the different levels of atmosphere. So a human on the ground is vastly superior to a satellite when it comes to telling you what the ground temperature is that day. Another spy question. All right, Scott Ritter, good Marine, certainly better than Ole North. Scott, what?
People waiting at the mic.
Oh, yeah, okay. All right. I apologize. We kind of did a mid-change here, and that's wrong. All right, Scott Ritter's a good guy. How many of you are at the mics? Okay. From now on, if someone's not at the mic, you can shout out. But if someone is at the mic, they have precedence. Okay, someone at the mic.
I had another question when I sort of joined the line in the beginning about sort of the financial situation of the U.S. But after having listened to you now for about half an hour, I'm really wondering, to get back to the earlier point, why aren't the U.S., the Americans not rioting in the streets? You haven't had a proper election in 12 years. Your currency is in the crap. You're in 2 illegal wars.
Yeah,
What's going on here?
It's an absolutely, it may be the question of our time. It's an absolutely essential question, and I'll break it down by category. The NASCAR dads, the large blue-collar white population that has been won over by the Republican extremists, their entire worldview is based on talk radio. And I will go back to before 9/11. Before 9/11, there were senators and congressmen who bragged that they did not need a U.S. passport because nothing that happened overseas mattered to their constituents at home. That was the American perspective at the so-called elite level. At the same time, the American elite now relies on corporations, which basically consider national governments to be annoyances, to be worked around. And so we're not inconveniencing anyone on Wall Street by being stupid. In fact, there's a body of literature emerging that says that Wall Street is known for the last 10 years that we're heading toward a depression, and the smart money in the hedge funds has been betting short and has basically been betting on the U.S. collapsing and becoming a third world country, and they've been building up their alternative sites in Dubai and Singapore and elsewhere. Malaysia's been very popular. All I can say is I think that a form of opium of the people has been achieved in the United States. And you know, most Americans don't realize that what we see on CNN is shit. You know, there's a wonderful book called Fog Facts. It's about things that kind of are known but not known. Among us, among people that read and care, it's known that there were 935 lies. It's known that there were 25 high crimes and misdemeanors. And despite its cartoon cover, the book Weapons of Mass Deception is a very important book, a very useful, serious book. So I think in some ways I go back to a thought that I had about 10 years ago, which is it's time for Europe and the Southern Hemisphere to create the voice to America.
To add to that, I was in Europe last week where I live and do most of my work, and I was having a strategy session as part of my job with a bunch of bankers from Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland.
Oh, cool.
After having done our sort of formal bit and over a bunch of beers, we were discussing, of course, the dollar, which is the hip thing now to do. And for the first time, because I do talk to bankers about 2 or 3 times a year over the last decade, for the first time they all basically admitted to me at a personal level that all of their banks were quietly getting out of the dollar because they all had way too many of them and they were dropping in value all the time. And so we were all saying, well, look, if America can't, get its own house in order through whatever means, either through a proper election or, burning some tires in the streets or whatever is required, then maybe, Europe and China need to pull the plug on the thing and prevent Iran from being nuked that way. Because
prevent what?
Prevent Iran from being attacked or nuked, that
Right.
way.
That's very interesting. It's actually 2 parts. First off, pulling the plug, actually, I like the idea of pulling the plug, but the thing is, if China pulls the plug on the U.S., Walmart collapses, and so does most of Chinese cottage industry. What people don't realize is that China has massive problems. All of these investors that went into China with shiny eyes and, all this sweatshop thing and school kids making explosives and stuff, they're starting to realize that not only are their factories not getting reliable energy, they're now running out of water. And so a whole bunch of the so-called investments in China are now at risk. So on the one hand, China not only cannot pull the plug, from what I've heard, I'm not an economist or a financial person or anything like that, but second, China has a vested interest in keeping us afloat. I understand that some of the Wall Street houses were able to, at least one of them was able to call the Prime Minister of China and get a $6 billion loan overnight on his word. And so there's a vested interest there in kind of keeping the place stable. Part of the problem with information era stuff, particularly when it's based on financial derivatives that are all fluff, is that it doesn't degrade gracefully. It crashes. There's no graceful degradation. It's on or it's off. And so I'm very, very, very concerned right now. And if we have a consolidated meltdown, which looks like we're creeping away from, then it's going to be bad. And one of the things that people don't realize about all these foreclosures is that it created places where vagrants could go, and criminals could go, and drug users could go. And Cleveland had to literally raze 11,000 houses to the ground. Now, let's go to Iran. There have been a couple of things under the wire, and again, the Chinese brought Cheney down over Singapore, and what I think the American public doesn't realize, it's probably around 1:45, something like that. Okay. I mean, I'll stop at 2, and then anyone who wants to stay can come closer, and we'll turn up the lights and stuff or whatever. But China can now pop a submarine up behind a U.S. carrier protected by an entire carrier group, and there's nothing we can do about it. And they did that as a demonstration. China can now neutralize, I'm speculating here, but I believe this is true. China can now neutralize any weapon system, any mobility system that we have with electromagnetic pulses. In fact, you can kill people inside of a tank just by putting in certain kinds of pulse waves. It fries their ass inside of the tank without having to penetrate the hull. At the same time, there have been some death threats against Secretary of the Treasury Paulson. And I think that behind the scenes, the Russians and others are basically making it personal now. And I believe, I speculate, that Paulson and several others have basically been told that if they don't get their shit together, they're going to end up as a head on some horse's straw. I agree. I think he is. I think he's an honorable man, but you don't know what you don't know. And I think we've made a we've made a huge mistake in turning the Treasury over to Goldman Sachs, and we've also made a huge mistake in allowing the Federal Reserve to be a substitute for the U.S. Treasury. The Federal Reserve is not part of the U.S. government, and it's idiocy to think that they're going to regulate anything. So I don't have an answer for you other than to say that I don't think we're going to attack Iran, but our biggest problem right now is Israel. Israel has made it clear that it will attack Iran no matter what we do, and Dick Cheney is on record as telling Israel that before the inauguration and after the election, we will attack Iran no matter what. And I think there is an active anti-attack Iran movement. I think people just need to really elevate this in conference. You know, fooled once, fooled twice. We were fooled by Iraq, and we certainly shouldn't be fooled by Iran. Nuclear power is a very reasonable, thoughtful option for Iran to be pursuing. And frankly, nuclear war is also. Obama, the main reason I have turned against Obama is because all of his foreign policy knowledge comes from Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski. Brzezinski was a great strategist in his time. He is now out to pasture and over the top. Brzezinski is a Pole. He has one last war with Russia left in him. He's delusional in thinking he can push the Chinese back from Africa and Latin America. As far as I'm concerned, Barack Obama has not learned how to find good advisors. He has 300 foreign policy advisors, but obviously I'm not one of them, nor would I want to be. Yeah, thank you. But the reality is we really need to make it irrelevant who gets elected. We need to get back in the game here. It's no longer a game. It's about the future of our kids. Please, if you have a follow-up, otherwise I'll go to him and then let's talk more afterwards. I will certainly go down and have a couple of diet sodas before I go to bed again.
My question is brief. You briefly spoke at Hope Number 6 about your work doing remote enemy IED detonation. I just want to know if you could briefly elaborate on that more.
Well, there is a report on our website on, we did an IED detonation survey, and one of the things we found that was pretty fascinating was that the Chinese cellular industry is really exploding.
Literally.
Yeah, okay. Unintended, whatever. And it's now possible to buy a base camp that is landline connected and then has all these cells that can be activated. I have not come up to date with it since then. The whole concept of asymmetric warfare is one that the U.S. was extremely slow to understand. For the price of a cup of tea, I could have told them that we have learned over and over again, both the British and American empires, that a big war force doesn't know how to do small war. And by the time it learns, 2 to 5 years later, it can no longer do big war. General Shinseki was absolutely correct when he said, we don't want to do it, but if you want us to do Iraq, we can do it. We have to do it right. It needs 400,000 people so that they won't loot the armories to get their IED materials. They won't loot the ministries so that we can restore business. We should not dismantle the army and the police, you know, so on. But going back to Brzezinski, he's the guy who gave Pakistan the nuclear bomb. He's the guy who told Pakistan, you get a complete buy from us. We're not going to enforce proliferation standards as long as you help us with Afghanistan. Now, Pakistan is Sunni. Iran is Shiite. Okay, the Iranians aren't afraid of us. They and the Chinese already know how to kick our ass, and the Iranians are brilliant. I mean, they used Ahmed Shalabi as an asset of influence, who's been fired by the CIA for lying and stealing. They used him to pour sweet nothings into Dick Cheney's ear, and they got the U.S. taxpayer to pay for the toppling of their two greatest threats.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't a raghead. This is a Persian with 600 years of intelligence in them. The Iranians are not afraid of us. They're deathly afraid of Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and the rest of the Sunnis. Okay? And for us to have a government that doesn't understand that is frightening. I mean, Condi Rice is frightening in many, many ways. Okay, another question.
Sherry, please go ahead.
Thank you. Presumably, over the next couple hundred years, we're going to get really good at genetic modifications. And parents are going to want their kids to be smarter or taller or faster or metabolize things faster or whatever. And maybe companies will start marketing to them. I'm just curious as to how you think this will tie into capitalism and politics.
Interesting question. Thank you. If I've learned one thing in the last 10 years of accelerated reading, it's that diversity is absolutely the essential foundation for evolution, and that contrived diversity is assuredly going to give you as fucked up a kid as you ever wanted. So capitalism may well go toward marketing kids and cloning kids and things like that. But I am hopeful. One of the reasons I've committed the rest of my life to being intelligence officer to the poor and to creating the world brain is because I believe that the future of the planet lies among the poor and the diversity that they can bring. It frosts my ass that my kids are like third generation rich and don't want to have a job, and I can no longer beat them. And so I go to a supermarket and I see a Vietnamese kid that's not only a bagger, they're hustling their ass off to try and do everybody else's job too. Okay? Now that's how you get innovation. So my sense is that genetics and capitalism are very, very interesting, but I'll kind of circle around to this, and if you can last another 15 minutes, I'd be glad to take this on face-to-face in a smaller circle or whatever. Jim Bamford's second book on NSA, called Body of Secrets, he spends the whole book talking about how NSA has spent close to $1 trillion, or I mean a lot of money on trying to create all these supercomputers and all of this stuff, and they haven't succeeded. I mean, today we're processing less than 1 million out of billions of messages, and generally late, and we don't speak 182 of the 183 languages we need. Doing the math there? And so, I mean, NSA is a joke in a lot of ways. 80% of signals intelligence is pattern analysis, not content decryption and understanding. It's vastly more important, and Steve Emerson has already done this in a book called American Jihad, it's vastly more important to know that there are 55 specific places around the United States where the community is conducive to terrorists being invisible. This is not rocket science. And so you can basically have an overt overlay on that place. But Jim, at the end of his book, the last paragraph talks about, after talking about all of NSA's failures to achieve nirvana, he says one day NSA may achieve the ultimate in computing. They may achieve a small handheld computer that runs on virtually no energy, that can do petaflop calculations per nanosecond, and then colon. And the last three words in his book are the human brain. Okay? So I believe that our future, machine learning is vastly oversold. Contractors, big pharma, genetics, genome mapping, all of this is vastly oversold. What we need to do is get back in the business of being humanity, back in the business of sharing information. Alvin Toffler, who became a friend after he wrote the chapter on the future of the spy, he called me the rival store, and I guess I've turned out to be that. He said that the magic of information is that you can share it and still have it, whereas with tangible property that's not the case. And Yochai Benkler and others have persuaded me that we can create infinite wealth. There's a book by Barry Carter called Infinite Wealth. Toffler's written Revolutionary Wealth. Yochai Benkler's written Wealth of Networks. Thomas Stewart has written The Wealth of Knowledge. You kind of see a trend here. Okay, I am absolutely convinced we can do what Buckminster Fuller wanted us to do in the first place, and that is create an operating manual for Spaceship Earth that the Chinese will say, hey, we need one of those, and have them adopt it, enhance it, and go forth.
Nice.
So I'll come back to you later if you want. Over here?
I would love to ask a question that might shift gears for a second, but I'm sure you'll loop it back into the big picture, as you always brilliantly do. What is the end game for the war on drugs? And the short story that I'll tie into that is I was on the Princeton campus for a tool meeting, actually, and I just bumped into Dr. West, Cornel West.
Oh, yeah, I like him, actually.
And I said, hey, you know, because he was actually talking about prisons and the prison complex.
Right.
I saw the end of his talk, and I said, hey, what is the answer for the drug war? Is the answer in the minority community? Because they have the most to lose. They get fucked hardest because of the drug war. And he actually said, you know, I wish it were, but they are the community that's been hurt so badly, and every preacher rallies against the evils of substance and self-medication. The answer cannot come from us. Do you cotton to that notion, or do you not? How does the drug war end, if it ever can, and how does it all play into us moving the ball forward?
That's an absolutely lovely question. First off, his book, Democracy Matters, is one that I consider to be Nobel-level material, and one that buries Larry Summers forever as a dumb white fuck. It's an excellent book, and I tried to summarize it to the best of my ability. And I think Cornel West is a man who's one of the essential thinkers of our time, particularly in relation to the people of color. Other books that will help you understand people of color include the book Off the Books, The Underground Economy, The Urban Economy. It's a lovely book about bartering and what really poor people do to trade meals or babysitting for light mechanics on their car and stuff like that. I was approached by the producer of The Last Great Hope, a wonderful DVD on the drug war. And I was very glad to volunteer. He paid my expenses, and I went out to Los Angeles, and it was kind of fun. I mean, even though I was only filmed in a garage, it was like movie star stuff, and this guy was a real professional. He did everything perfectly. And I think in the outtakes, all of my remarks are still on record online, not just the stuff that he used in the DVD. America should inherently be a nation that abides by its Constitution, a nation that was inherently intended to be Christian. I now understand the Spanish edicts of expulsion, because Islam, and I'm wandering around here, but I'm coming back to this, Islam is inherently an anti-governance religion. It's a religion that at its best, believes that states should take second place. And Israel, unfortunately, has the same problem. I mean, Israel cut a demonic deal with its rabbis. after it used terrorism to drive the British out of Palestine. And the Israelis are still delusional about how there was nobody there when they got there. They turned the desert into an oasis. That's all bullshit. The Israelis are stealing water from the Arab aquifers with long underground pipes. And the Israeli agricultural industry, which is responsible for 3% of Israel's GDP, is using 50% of the Middle Eastern water. Okay, this is nuts. But coming back to this whole thing about black people, it's details like that that have to come into the consciousness. Now, I don't know how you shame the American people. I have come to the conclusion that we need several Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. And I hope that Lee Kuan Yew and Nelson Mandela don't die before an enlightened president is able to ask for their help. I'd like Nelson Mandela to chair a Truth and Reconciliation Commission on everything that the U.S. has done to the rest of the world that has been inherently evil and bad. And I would like Lee Kuan Yew to chair a Truth and Reconciliation Commission on everything we have done to our own people that is inherently evil and bad. I lived overseas, and so I really never had a prejudice bone in my body when I came back. But when I went into a Marine Corps squad bay for training, the first thing I learned, and the sergeants were very, very focused on this because the other kids had not been overseas all their lives, he said, we have only one color Marine. We have only green Marines. We have dark green Marines, and we have light green Marines, but we have only one color Marine. And that's the metaphor by which we should live. And just like when Eisenhower got off the plane and he was asked by Marshall, everybody wants to know, are you a Democrat or a Republican? Eisenhower said, I'm an American. Okay, I think we need to kill both political parties. The Democratic and Republican political party leadership is just as bad for America as the Vatican Mafia Wall Street leadership. And the only way we're going to displace them, and here I return to Buckminster Fuller, the only way we're going to displace them is by recognizing that Fuller had it right. You don't try and fix a system that's broken, you create a new system that displaces it. And the way we self-govern is by using the internet, by using citizen wisdom councils, which are discussed in Jim Ruff's book, Society's Breakthrough, by reading Tom Atlee's The Tao of Democracy, by reading All Rise, Dignity in the Future, by reading Escaping the Matrix, by reading The Cultural Creatives. There are an enormous number of books out there. The bottom line is we've got to stop being drugged bystanders. We've got to start focusing on the fact that there is a prison slave industry in this country. There's also a pharma hospital industry. There's also a military-industrial complex. There's also a secret intelligence complex where it's now gotten so that contractors are doing things that the government used to do, and that's not good. Because when I was a case officer, not only were there risks that I would take as a case officer that a contractor would never take, but there were also some things I wouldn't do that a contractor will do for money. And a lot of our torture has been handled by contractors. And I think we've lost accountability of our government. And so I personally plan to attend and maybe even speak at the second annual meeting of the 27 secessionist movements. It takes place in October. I'm not sure where, but if you look up Kirkland Sale and secessionists, you'll find the Maryland Institute or whatever it's called, and you'll be able to find it. I would encourage all of you to show up there in October and at the Citizen Summit in February, and it would be kind of fun. And I think coming back to your question, the bottom line is America's clueless. We need to do more to put this information, for example, taking boycotts. I would like to be able to identify any good or service that is dependent on prison labor and put it out of business. Over here?
Yeah.
Okay, stop.
Just wanted you to mention this.
Oh, are you still offering them outside?
Yeah, they're still there, and we got a bunch over here too. And
Okay.
also give people contact information if they want to order them online. People who might be watching at home.
Oh, God bless you. Thank you. Are you changing tapes or are we stopping?
It depends on how we do the informal gathering.
Well, let's stay with your system, and then as people go out, you guys can come forward and we can be a little bit more intimate. You know about the book? You don't want to hear about it again?
Let's hear about it again.
All right. Well, you can buy it on Amazon. I only publish 1,500 at a time. I self-publish because I don't have time to deal with dickheads in New York. And I'm very proud of this book because it's the first book to not have my name on the cover. Mark Tovey was initially the junior editor, and he's a PhD student in Canada. And I realized after working with Tom Atlee and George Poore and putting together the first 30 pieces, I realized I should get out of the way, and I did, and that was the beginning of my new life. I am now behind the scenes rather than forward. And Tovey, to his credit, now has a book that's better than anything any of his professors have published. And it's a seminal work. You can get it free online. The shortcut for the free book, which is a full PDF for the book that's searchable, and then it's individual documents for each chapter, is oss.net/CIB for Collective Intelligence Books. So I never try and sell this book without telling you that it's free online. Okay, but it's a collectible. It'll be a pain in the ass for me to have to take the other 4 boxes back, but that's okay. I can do that. And everyone who buys the book gets one of the golden candle pins. The last 250, I won't be reproducing them. Okay, did we have another question?
Yes.
Ready?
Yes. I just wanted to follow up on the question, why aren't we in the streets? And you finished off by saying, we're clueless. How do we get through the apathy of everybody? How do we get through the ignorance of people that saying it's not that bad, this isn't a problem? It is a problem. There's a 30% approval rating for Bush still.
Well, let me repeat that comment. Take away the broadcast license of the major media corporations. That's certainly part of it. Open spectrum is something we've got to have soon. Oops. Okay, open spectrum is certainly part of it. I'm actually going to end here this 40-second bit by saying that I've recently been turned on to the possibilities of art and street theater. And we can pick up on that when we come back. All right, let's take a break. I actually don't have to go to the bathroom. It's part of my new healthy lifestyle. But let's take a break, and whoever comes back, I'll stay with you as long as you want. I've had my nap.
And just to let folks know, tomorrow morning,
6 drinks. But I think what's interesting is I actually see hope now. And I was almost not going to come to this. I didn't think anybody would really be interested in hearing me again. And I was also, Monday when I go back, I've got to get all my furniture out of my office because we found someone to rent it. But I think at the end of the day, we have to decide whether we're here in the moment and trying to help each other, or whether we're just going to be tuned out. And I'm not preaching to you, because believe me, it'll be a year or 2 before I'm certain that I'm not drinking as a matter of routine. But I think I was doing more damage through neglect to my family and stuff like that than good. And now also I'm feeling stronger. I mean, you know, for you puppies in the audience that are under 55, everything up to 55 is training wheels. You're only an adult after 55. And I figured that out when I turned 50. And I looked around, and there was Brent Scowcroft, still going strong. And oh, shit, I'm still a baby. Anyway, life is good. So, questions on substance?
Right here.
Yes, sir. Please go. Where's the microphone?
There are 2 microphones.
Oh, there are 2 microphones. Okay.
Earlier you mentioned National Security Study Memorandum 200, the Henry...
2000.
Oh, 2000. Okay, totally different then. Okay.
It was 2000. Okay, go ahead.
This was. Why do you think there are still some 9/11 conspirators that say that 9/11 was an inside job? Like, what do you think needs to happen before, or is it even possible for people to just let that go? And
well, no, it's not possible to let it go because there's too much there to let go. I have read and reviewed most of the books and most of the DVDs on 9/11. And I am persuaded that 9/11 was at a minimum let it happen. I believe that this plot was hatched by bin Laden and elements of the Pakistani intelligence service that are extremely radical. Now, Pakistani intelligence service is basically like three different slices. There's the really wild-ass Islamic Jihad slice, and then there's the pro-Western slice, and then there's the middle kind of ground. You know, Pakistan is an independent Islamic nation that'll do whatever it takes. But the Pakistanis are not stupid, so when the Western side of the Pakistani intelligence service got wind of the extremist side of the Pakistani intelligence service and what they were doing, they came and blew the whistle. And my reading tells me that no fewer than 9 nations told the United States in advance that this was going to happen. The Israelis even sent the video crew in advance to position itself so as to be able to take pictures. At the same time, I believe the Mossad told Larry Silverstein that this was going to happen. Now, Silverstein had a real asbestos problem. It was one he couldn't afford to fix. And this must have been a gift from heaven, because among other things, in cahoots with the Bush family member that ran the security company, they basically closed down all the cameras for a weekend. The videotapes are there on all the dust, the residual dust and everything. The thermite evidence is there. I think they installed controlled demolitions in all 3 buildings. In the Pentagon, I think it was a missile. Major General Siglob is on record, on TV, as saying Siglob was the guy in charge of all Soviet imagery analysis. He says this was a missile. And if you look at the early pictures, it's actually a hole up here. It's not until later that the stuff collapses. And there's no video evidence and whatever. I will come back to JFK by saying that we now have a book called Someone Would Have Talked, which establishes to my satisfaction that JFK was killed by Cuban exiles using CIA training and CIA sniper equipment, that they were given to take Castro out. And they chose to take Kennedy out because of the Bay of Pigs. I'm a hot-blooded Latino myself, and I know Cubans, and I think this is totally, totally credible. Oswald was a patsy. He was in the lunchroom when it happened, where he had been every day for the last X number of months. And he's the only one of all the people tested who did not test positive for gunpowder residue. Period. He had no gunpowder residue, and the weapon wasn't the weapon that was used, and there were more than one shooter and more than one shot and so forth. So coming back to 9/11, Rudy Giuliani, scoop and dump Giuliani, I have enormous respect for the firefighters in New York. And if the firefighters in New York are pissed off, there's something there. What actually ended up happening, and you know, the question you always ask, regardless of what you know about the circumstances, is who benefits, okay? So I think that, A, Larry Silverstein got an insurance bonanza, and I'm sure was in cahoots with at least some executives in the insurance company, because insurance companies are not stupid. You don't pay out a double terrorism indemnity 2 weeks after the building's been insured without doing a massive investigation. So I think there's actually, this is a money laundering thing, this is an insurance scam, you know, that's, what's that? Well, Building 7 may have been the control building for the remote control override that made sure these assholes hit the building. And there's no evidence that there were actually people on the airplanes. In fact, there's one line of thought that says that this was a combination of directed energy plus a drone. I don't know. What I do know, as a person who reads nonfiction for a living, what I do know is that the 9/11 Commission was a complete whitewash. At best, it was grotesquely incompetent. At worst, it was a cover-up. And what I do know, and Mike, the guy that wrote Crossing the Rubicon, yeah, Mike Rupert and I have been having conversations over the phone. I do know that there is more than enough evidence to warrant an indictment in an independent People's Commission or Citizens Wisdom Council on all of this. I don't know, but I mean, it still needs to happen. You know, 9/11 is probably the crime of the century, because no building in history has been brought down by an airplane until 9/11. And you don't pancake. I mean, a building, if it were like that, it would go sideways. And the testimony of the firefighters on the radios and everything is the explosions went from bottom up, okay? So basically 3,000 people were murdered by American officials. And I suspect that Giuliani was the only person in New York City in the know. And it's one of the reasons the Republican Party treats him with kid gloves. Giuliani apparently had already orchestrated the trucks, each with a GPS system to keep track of the stuff. He scooped and dumped a lot of gold and other valuables that were insured. There's no evidence that they were in the rubble. And a whole lot of SEC files got destroyed. So when you ask yourself the question, who benefits? And you look at all of this, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff. I mean, my second book, what? Well, the Patriot Act, nobody, yeah, Bush benefited, but yeah, but yes, you're right. But I think this was more than the Patriot Act. This was the neocon agenda. If you want to understand the neocon agenda, there's a wonderful book called Endgame: Winning the War on Terror by General McInerney and a couple of other real morons. And these are the guys who think they can nuke their way through the Middle East. It's just not working for me. But I want to say that in my second book, I have a section on 9/11, what happened and why. And you had a number of intelligence failures and policy failures. For example, 9/11, the FBI had 2 walk-ins, one in Newark, New Jersey, and one in Orlando, Florida, both well in advance of 9/11. And both of them wanted to tell the FBI about the 9/11 plot. And the way the FBI mentality is, when they're busy not opening computers that they've captured, the FBI mentality is if you tell us names and those names are not in our file, you must be a fabricator. This is how stupid they are, okay? So we had 2 walk-ins. We had a guy in a German jail calling every single day for a week prior to the event. As I said, we had at least 9 governments tell us. So bottom line for me is that 9/11 was allowed to happen. By the way, the Crisis Command and Control Center is in the World Trade Center. So why do we need one on the pier in New York? All right, obviously we know that we're not going to be able to use the one that's in the World Trade Center. Okay, and Dick Cheney, if you go back, I mean, there are 2 books on Dick Cheney that I highly recommend. One is called The 1% Doctrine, the other is called Vice, Dick Cheney and the Hijacking the American Presidency. I generally don't mention books that I haven't reviewed, because I don't know them. It's not that I'm pushing myself. I'm just saying, there's reviews there. And my reviews are summative. For example, my review of the second book itemizes the 25 high crimes and misdemeanors that Cheney has committed. 2 simple examples. Colin Powell succeeded in getting the North Koreans to accept our terms. And Cheney said, well, that's not what I want. And he put more onerous terms down that drove the North Koreans away from the table. Had I been Powell, I would have told Cheney to fuck off and gone public. The Iranians used the Swiss to approach the U.S. government in 2003, saying, look, we'd like to calm everything down in the region. We're ready to negotiate. Everything's on the table. Cheney threw out the offer and chewed out the Swiss for daring to bring it to us. Okay, I mean, Cheney is a nakedly amoral criminal. And sadly, the International Red Cross is now about to come out publicly and say that the U.S. is guilty of war crimes. And this is Cheney, Bush, our generals. Well, yes, but again, I come back to hold the power of information. Why is it that I'm the only guy going around saying that Exxon didn't make $40 billion in profit? Why isn't CNN doing this? Okay, I mean, we know about ownership and stuff, but what we have to do is we have to push all of this out. So no, you're never going to put 9/11 to rest just the way we weren't able to put JFK to rest until the truth finally came out. Truth actually does have a tangible value in the long run. And I think, going back to these Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, it's not possible to be a great nation on a foundation of lies. And America right now is a cheating culture. That's the name of a book that I've reviewed. It's a cheating culture. We have really managed to basically commit intellectual and emotional and civic suicide since Vietnam. And that's a shame. Yes, sir.
I was wondering what you know and how do you feel about Osama bin Laden being a CIA asset with the code name Tim Osman, as well as Dick Cheney running the North American Air Defense Drill Valiant Warrior on the morning of 9/11 when he has no affiliation with that agency?
Right. Okay, those are two good questions. Everyone heard them? All right. Number one, I believe my CIA colleagues when they say that we did not fund bin Laden. Bin Laden was a self-funded, Saudi-funded capability that went into Afghanistan. And in fact, he had a lot of issues in Afghanistan because they were Arabs. And the people in Afghanistan and Pakistan are not Arabs. And so there was this conflict between Arab Islam and non-Arab Islam. I will also tell you that Mike Shear, each book he publishes comes closer and closer to saying bin Laden's right and we're wrong. In other words, bin Laden's problem is with our presence in the Middle East and the despotic Saudi royal family, which consists of 60,000 assholes who live at public expense, and basically you can kidnap a B-list movie star for about $50,000 and she's put on the Saudi Learjet and she's gone forever by name.
I mean, that's really interesting. It's just, I mean, I've read the declassified federal document from the FBI warning the CIA not to go, no, I'm sorry, backwards, the CIA to the FBI not to go after Osama bin Laden because he is a CIA asset.
Really?
By the name of Tim Osman. Yes, it's on federaljack.com in our ebooks archive.
I'd love to have the URL. My email address is bear@oss.net.
We'll email you that right now.
Yeah, I'd love to have the URL. I don't, you know, everybody can be a CIA asset in one way or another. I know bin Laden was visited by a CIA station chief when he was in the hospital. Yeah, but it's in general, the CIA's biggest mistake in the Middle East was to allow the Saudis and the Shah and others to say, you can't talk to our dissidents. So CIA was basically cut down. When the Iranians took over the embassy in Tehran, they captured the 4 CIA guys that were there, and they were seriously pissed off for 2 reasons. Only 4? And none of you speak Farsi? Who the fuck do you think we are, Somalia? Okay? I mean, CIA is not serious in a lot of these places. I mean, today, CIA is puppies, okay? And it's tragic. But going back to the second part of your question, which was...
Dick Cheney's
Dick Cheney. All right.
involvement with Valiant Warrior.
I think that was a carefully calculated plan. It was actually a government-wide exercise. It was a government-wide exercise. It had a scenario of planes crashing into the NRO. It was a government-wide exercise that allowed Dick Cheney to keep his control over the entire government. It allowed him to move the Strip Alert aircraft out of the eastern coast. There is a very well-established protocol for dealing with aircraft that go off course. And at no time in history until 9/11 had NORAD ever failed to intercept such an airplane within 15 minutes.
In 2000, they had 67 intercepts with 100% accuracy.
Right, exactly. So the literature is quite clear here. There is something wrong with this picture.
Well, yes, I mean, my smoking guns, I am a firm believer that 9/11 was a false flag operation as a pretext to go to war with Iraq and to create the Patriot Act, Victory Act 1 and 2 police state in the U.S. Eventually, by 2012, through Operation Endgame through the Department of Homeland Security, a North American Union inevitably to be a one-world government. However, the reason why I feel this way is because of the NORAD implications with Dick Cheney, as well as he was one of the architects of Project of a New American Century, which called for a new Pearl Harbor.
Right. Let's downplay this because I want to get to a lot of other questions. I think I'll meet you halfway. This has to be investigated. It was a let it happen. There were crimes committed against Americans that are just absolutely abysmal. I was talking to a lady that talked, well, anyway. All right, so let's move on from this.
Thank you very much.
I'm interested in your URL. Does anyone have another question over here?
I just have a quick question. If there's any hackers still left in the room, what information do you need or would you like?
Good question.
Her phone number. No. That's a great question. What information do I need or do I want? Well, if you could scrub the Earth Intelligence Network, I mean, I'm not very good at website promotion and stuff like that. I mean, my wife is really pissed off at me because I've spent my profit from the last 2 years creating a nonprofit, which turned out to be exactly the right thing to do. The last $8,000 I had left, I spent publishing this book and taking my name off it, and that turned out to be exactly the right thing to do by divine providence. I want to give your question very, very careful thought. In 1992, I ran the first conference on open source intelligence, and CIA said, we'll come, but only if it's secret, U.S. citizens only. And I had to say, what part of open source don't you understand? And fortunately, Admiral Studeman, as a fellow naval officer, allowed me to gain an audience. And I said, sir, this is nuts. And he ordered them to attend. And then after he retired, open source intelligence became known within CIA, including its own open source people who were mediocre menopausal grandmothers and young white kids. It became known as open source, S-O-R-E-S. I think that the whole idea, it's not what I need, it's what we need. The whole idea here is we need to create a Citizen Intelligence Minuteman Corps. And the problem that we've had, and I'll tell you what I told the hackers in 1994. You know, I understood what was happening. I understood that people were finding vulnerabilities, and I understood that there were good hackers and bad hackers and stuff. I said, look, you've got to create a website. You've got to basically, when you find a vulnerability, you go to the company very discreetly and privately, you tell them the vulnerability, you offer suggestions on the fix, and if they haven't fixed it in 30 days, then you go public. Okay? And, of course, you guys didn't listen to me then. Or the generation... Well, yeah, that's an absolutely reasonable thing to say, and that's why my website's based in Sweden. Okay. I mean, I hear you, but that's not good enough. But I also understand, because Bruce Sterling wrote Hacker Crackdown, and I've testified in writing against Secret Service lies against hackers. I mean, you got to understand, these guys lie because they don't know. It's not that they're bad, they just don't know. So anyway, what I think we really need, is the blogging of this meme of Citizen Intelligence Minuteman. I mean, we're trying to set up a system right now where we will train anybody for free so that they can become their county or municipality intelligence officer. And I've had to stop it briefly because I've been using up life savings because my for-profit business was killed by the war. It was taxed out of existence as funds were redirected, so I no longer have a multi-million-dollar business. And so I'm technically unemployed. But for a while there, for about 2 years, we were publishing a weekly report called Global Challenges, the Week in Review. And we've been doing this worldwide survey, and we've got this wonderful Access database and open source center in Australia. That's where my nonprofit stuff is based. My for-profit ops centers in not Singapore, in Sweden. And we were publishing a report which basically in 8 pages, the top page was a one-line summary of what had happened in each of the 10 threats, 12 policies, 8 demographics. And then each of the succeeding 8 pages had like 2 or 3 headlines for each of the 10 threats, 12 policies, so forth. And our next big step is to tie this to budgets and to start publishing what we're spending on terrorism and poverty and infectious disease and so on. So we've got a lot of work to do, but we've been investing heavily. Someone else has been investing heavily, and we're about 85%. If you guys want to see the future, go to scout.com. And then imagine that applied to every single topic on the planet. Okay? Scout.com. What it's about is end-user generated content. All right? So what I want to do is get to a point where all of the citizens of Westchester County are essentially online. They're feeding stuff up, including handheld photos with GPS coordinates. In Taiwan right now, they're paying money to citizens who take pictures of corporate pollution and then send it in with a little template note. So they've harnessed the distributed intelligence of all of their citizens. So I guess, and I'm trying to be very unselfish here, I guess what we really need is we need for this meme of public intelligence and the public interest to get out there. You know, dig it, whatever. I don't blog, really. I've got a blog, citizensparty.com. I don't have a lot of time for it. And I don't spend a lot of time or money on trying to make Earth Intelligence Network very popular. But the thing that would really make my heart sing is if people started taking responsibility for keeping their government accountable by using public intelligence to educate others and to then show the lunacy and the idiocy and the graft and the corruption that permeates our entire governance system.
We should get you a TED Talk, because
What's
then
that?
we should get you a talk at TED. Because
Well, you
then
know,
you're reaching like a couple of thousand, internet millionaires.
It's funny you mention that, because I think TED knows who I am, and they're not yet sure whether I'm a lunatic or a genius.
They're quite apolitical, so maybe you need to rewrap the message.
Well,
a bit.
I would be honored to be invited to speak at TED. I've seen others that they've spoken at. By the way, I highly recommend the TED website where you can see the videos of people who have spoken. Barnett, who wrote a really shitty book, has matured tremendously since then, and I was very impressed by his TED briefing. And I went back and modified my review to say it's still a shitty review, but this guy has really evolved, and so forth. Another question. Thank you for asking that question.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. This is going to be a little bit more meta, and I hope not too far out
I
of
love meta.
left field, but, a lot of the problems that everyone here has talked about in many of these conferences seems to have to do with the fact that human institutions at a certain point in time, whether it's because they become too big or too old,
right,
they start sort of collectively self-selecting towards self-serving,
right,
insular
right,
/ evil behavior.
Right, right.
And I wonder if you've looked into, looking at behavioral models of self-organization, and whether or not you see any validity towards, applying mass behavioral models in some way to, provide scrutiny or incentives against what may, the ethical decay of organizations.
Yeah,
whether they be intelligence agencies.
that's a very good question. A couple of angles on it. Number one, the Weberian concept of bureaucracy and the whole pyramidal organization of the industrial era was based on a time when information was difficult to get, and hoarding information was in fact a source of power. Now we're moving through pyramidal, away from pyramidal, towards squares and then circles. And there's a literature on that. And there's a chapter in here by Jean-François Noubel, who's one of the gurus of collective intelligence on that. And Jim Rowe has experimented with citizen wisdom councils. I mean, I don't know if you know the Danish have what they call a Danish citizens council, where if there's a really major issue that Denmark wants to consider, such as whether or not to allow genetically altered crops into Denmark, they get 12 Danish citizens whose only requirement for the job is that they know nothing about the subject at hand. And then they are turned into a kind of supreme court. And they are allowed to call witnesses, and they're allowed to grill them, they're allowed to subpoena them, they're allowed to basically force them to provide evidence and so forth. And then at the end of it, this council deliberates, and it comes up with a conclusion, and that's briefed to Parliament, and that's it. It's over. The citizens have decided. So one of the things that we're really struggling with, and I think many of these big businesses are starting to realize this, the smart money, I mean, look at what Schwab did. It spun off an electronic thing which then ate the parent. That was a good move. One of the things that's a real problem here, and John Bogle has a book, The Battle for the Soul of Capitalism. Basically, America is no longer an ownership society. We've spent the last 20 years creating financial derivatives and hedge funds and all of this stuff. And what Bogle says, and he's one of the top money managers on Wall Street who's now retired in Pennsylvania, he says that essentially the money managers, the financial guys, have stolen 1/5 of the value of all of the stuff they've been managing. They've basically ripped off all of the people. You know, and these are guys that are pulling down $300 million paychecks plus $500 million bonuses. I mean, Perot took his money out of the stock market and prior to the crash in the 80s because he said any industry that pays a 27-year-old $1 million a year has got to be nuts. And I think that's true. So the industrial era no longer works. Now, Kirkpatrick Sale, you remember Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful. Kirkpatrick Sale wrote a book called Human Scale. And we're right now at a point where there are two complementary new directions. New direction number one is home rule, eat local. If you want to do business in our county, you have to opt out of corporate personality liability protections and that kind of thing. The other is global assemblages. And we're not talking North American Union or world government or whatever. We're simply talking global assemblages. And so you're ending up with this cross-cutting matrix. And I just finished reading David Weinberger's book, Everything is Miscellaneous. It's a really fine book. Weinberger, by the way, is one of the top guys on Open Spectrum. He says everything is miscellaneous, and the whole point of his book is that structured databases are history. And that the reason you want to be able to have a completely unstructured web is because it allows that same piece of information to fit within multiple matrices. Okay? And so I think we're getting very, very close to where people can opt out of the bad and opt into the good. For example, I commend to all of you the World Index of Environmental and Social Responsibility, as well as the Intera Project. If you get hold of the Intera Project, they'll come in, they'll work with a local bank, they'll create a local credit card that then gives back to the community. And there are also credit cards and other means by which you can kind of register your social values. And if you then go to buy something that was created by sweatshop labor, the card will be declined, you know, I mean, that kind of stuff. I need to take a break, but I'm coming back. So please allow me to just go to the bathroom, and then I will be back, and I will not leave until I've signed every book that you wish or sold every book that we can.
I hope that you can use that for good luck or whatever.
Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. $250 billion. All right, time out. I'll be back in no more than 5 minutes. Pleasure. Bye-bye. Yeah, I know some of you have to catch the train, and some of you drove in so that you could get back. That's wonderful. What's going on? Are we filming? Okay. Okay, that sounds good. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I wanted to ask about...
Louder.
Hi, you made a remark on Friday that really intrigued me about that. One of the biggest uncovered stories right now was the electricity blackouts and brownouts. And I think it particularly struck me because I was here in 2006 when, you know, much of New York lost power for, it's in some places for up to almost 2 weeks, which was so striking. And I just wish you would elaborate more on that and also maybe recommend a few books or articles or whatever.
Well, what's striking to me is that everything that's happening to us now was easily anticipated decades ago. And I forget the exact quote, but apparently somebody said that the beginning of the collapse of civilization would be the beginning of the spread of blackout spots. You know, and we've had accidental blackouts. For example, a city in New Zealand lost power for an entire 5 weeks, the entire city, because their main power cable just fused into itself, and it took that long to fix it. NSA is now trying to build its own power generator, which I will suspect is going to be nuclear. Because it can't rely on the grid. Now, if I were president, I'd say, wait a minute, how about I just take away your budget and we make the grid work? You know, so this is kind of idiocy here. But what is happening now, and people, it's subtle, but apart from crashes, I mean, like the East Coast crash that was caused by a Canadian tree that hit, you know, whatever, apart from crashes and accidents, we have an extremely fragile infrastructure. There are basically 18 generators in the United States, and if you take out the Hoover Dam and you manage to take out one of the spares, and then you go burn down the German factory that makes them, the United States is in a hurt locker. Yeah. 18 major power generation sources, like Hoover Dam. This, I guess. I don't know what I mean. I heard it from someone else. I got you now. All right. I get you now. Okay. The bottom line is we're very, very vulnerable. And we have an entire society that is based on the assumption of cheap, unlimited energy. And so as a result, you've got this entire city is made of buildings that were designed on the assumption that the windows would never open. And it was designed on the assumption that the elevators would always work. You know, it's wrong. As a matter of fact, when you add computers and you add all the other things that are coming online, we're now burning out the wires. In fact, in Iraq, I was talking to some civil affairs guys, we made a huge mistake. It used to be that the dam would feed most of the power to Baghdad, and the outer cities were kept down. Well, some good-hearted American engineer decided to be more equitable, and he sent equal amounts of power out, and he fried all the lines, okay, going out to the hinterlands, because they weren't designed to take more power than they had already been established for. So we have an infrastructure that's very vulnerable. I'll tell you the infrastructure that concerns me most is water. There's a book called Blue Death, and what it basically says is we've relied forever on chlorine as the basis for municipal water purification. Never mind the fact that it's wonderful to have chlorine tanks you can blow up and really fuck up neighborhoods with. But the chlorine's not working. And so if you don't have a point of sale kind of filter, you're actually at risk of your own water, Giuliani water. Okay? In Russia, they have a worse problem. In Russia, they laid down the water pipes and then they put the sewage pipes on top in the same ditch. Yeah, and now all those pipes are cracking and the Russians are drinking shit. Yeah, right. Right. So what I would say is that if I made a round-the-world tour at my own expense in 1994, and I made a cold call on the Singapore National Computer Board and bunch of others all over the world. The only country on the planet that listened to me was Singapore. And today, Singapore is the world's first smart nation. They really do get it. And they're followed closely, without much help from me, by the Nordics, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Sweden. And then next up would be the Netherlands in some ways. But the Netherlands hasn't gone as far as I would have expected. Yeah, I know. But the thing is, I only talk to clever Dutch, you know, so they're constantly faking me out. By the way, I liked your presentation very much. It was really excellent. So we're rapidly getting to a point where we should expect basic amenities to start to degrade. There's a wonderful book called The Long Emergency, and I mean, I wish now that I had cashed out of the Washington, D.C. area 4 years ago, sold our house, sold my little office townhouse, and basically moved to Vermont. But my family didn't want to, and I may yet return to government, and so we're standing pat right now. Whoever the next president is going to have to redefine Homeland Security. Charlie Allen, the Undersecretary for Intelligence and Analysis at Homeland Security, is the senior member of my very small fan club in Washington. I've managed to alienate just about everybody there. But he only focuses on terrorism, whereas Homeland Security requires intelligence and analysis about poverty and infectious disease and environmental degradation and, I mean, development standards. We should put a stop to all development in floodplains. Florida is now in really deep shit. Time just did a wonderful cover story on Florida. I mean, when you start drinking salt water out of the tap, you have a problem. And so these things are spreading across the nation. And unfortunately, and I didn't realize this until I read Hunting with Jesus, unfortunately, it's not just the elite in Washington that is totally out to lunch and not working in the public interest. It's the little micro-elites in every small town across America. Okay? They're screwing over their local populations. They're selling out to corporations. And the very thing that could save us, an educated citizenry, is not being created. Okay? Yes, sir. Do you have a microphone?
I guess I do. On the note of corporations, do you agree that one of the best things that we could do would be the systematic cleansing of anything to do with a corporate product in our lives? You know, Coca-Cola and Heineken's and all those things that are produced by corporations as much as we possibly can?
Are you saying that we need to move immediately to home brew?
Not immediately, but as much as possible.
Well, you know, let me dissect that on several levels. Naomi Klein is a real genius, and I love her books, No Logo and Shock Capitalism. I think she's really made a huge contribution. It's funny because when I go out to Seattle, I like to tease the natives by walking around with a soda can, you know, because they really get it out there. And they have these little sipping cups, you know, that are sustainable. And they refill them, and then they sip from them, and so no plastic bottles. It takes more water to make a plastic bottle than it carries. Okay? So at one level, it's the whole packaging issue. At another level, it's the whole nutrition issue. At a third level, it's the whole labor fairness issue. I mean, if I were president, if you're not a member of a labor union, you're out of here. Okay? I mean, everybody should be a member of a labor union or a professional association. We have lost it with respect to the rights of labor and citizens and so forth. What's that?
Reagan was the first one to sort of start wrecking.
Oh, yeah. When he broke the back of the air traffic controller strike, that was the beginning of the end of American labor. And that was very, very wrong. And the military people, again, I have this real problem with the military people as a Marine Corps officer. They tend to confuse loyalty to the chain of command with loyalty to the Constitution. Because a properly educated general would have known that using the military to break the back of an American strike was the equivalent of violating the Posse Comitatus Act. Okay? It was using labor rather than arms, but it was violating the rights of American labor on American soil. And they should never have been allowed to get away with that. Okay, so I believe that we are caught between a rock and a hard place, because most people are earning a living, apart from the free and independent spirits in this room, most people are earning a living as part of the beast, and they rely on the beast for their paycheck. And so we don't have a migration strategy. Yes, sir, with a microphone.
In harmony with that, one thing that would seem that we could do almost immediately is change the corporate charter, which, you know, dictates that by law they must always maximize shareholder value, or it's against the law. And the other thing is remove their standing under the 14th Amendment as a person.
Well,
and make
certainly,
them totally
yes.
liable.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. The 14th Amendment was intended, I think, for freedmen for freedmen of color to assume their proper standing in society, and it has been grotesquely abused by corporations. I absolutely agree with that. However, I also agree with changing the corporate charter, and that's why we're starting to see the emergence of hybrid organizations that are a combination of corporation and nonprofit, and people are starting to realize that the triple bottom line, social, environmental, and profit. Now, I would have a more simple change to the corporate charter, which is to say you will show the IRS the same books you show your stockholders, okay? Because right now they have triple and quadruple books. I did my first, yeah, basically corporations have a tax return which says we didn't make any money this year. And then they pay dividends saying we actually did make a little bit of money. There's actually a third set of books which says we didn't make any money, we made a little bit of money, and oh, by the way, our Cayman Islands bank account is now, you know, plussed up by $500 million. Yeah, I mean, Halliburton paid $15 million in taxes on billions in profits about 4 or 5 years ago, whenever the data was from. Let's use the microphone. So yes, I think cleansing corporations is certainly a big part of it. And I think boycotts, not buying the wrong stuff and buying the right stuff, is certainly a big part of it. I mean, if you look at my closet, I have way too many shirts, way too many T-shirts. When I was growing up in Singapore, my cook's sons, who were very industrious students, they had 2 white shirts and 2 pairs of pants, and then I think 1 set of kind of like casual clothes, a pair of jeans and a T-shirt. And that was it. And they never, ever looked disleveled or whatever, you know, whatever. It's possible to get through life with just 2 sets of clothes. Okay, using the microphone.
So which do you think either of those are plausible, or which is more plausible than the other? Cleansing out that from our lives from our side, or changing the charter and the amendments and how it's abused?
Oh, it's certainly from our side is the first. One of the fascinating things for me is there's something called ScanBack, which allows a third-party tool. You can take a picture of a barcode and send it to Amazon, and they'll send you back the price of that product if you buy it from Amazon. Now, once you have that two-way channel established, there's no limit to what you can get back through that channel. So I anticipate the day coming when you'll be shopping for a T-shirt and or a designer shirt or whatever, and it'll come back to you and say, yeah, this has 1,500 liters of water from the growing of the corn through the flushing of the chemicals. It was brought in from China, so it's got 6 gallons of fuel in it. And it was made by 10-year-old boys in forced labor camp, you know, whatever. That's kind of a little off-putting. And then you can say, all right, well, either I'm not going to buy today, or what would you recommend? And then it would say, well, over here is this organically grown T-shirt from Louisiana that has minimal chemicals in it and, you know, is cheaper. Okay, so there's information is going to play a role in our lives like nobody would believe, even a group as advanced as this. And I'm very, very excited by that. Yes, sir.
On the vein of information, as well as talking about presidents and where corporations are telling communities what to do, should we be starting from the top up, or from top down, or from the bottom up? Because there's a lot of small communities. I've worked with enough electrical inspectors in various towns and cities to know that information between small towns does not get around. There's a lot of people reinventing the wheel or just doing it their own way. That's
a really interesting question. First off, bottom up is the answer. Epoch B leadership is bottom up. Let me see. I've got a slide here that shows it. But you also raise the interesting question of sharing best practices. Part of the reason that I put so much effort into Earth Intelligence Network was because I realized that the do-good movement is even more fragmented than the do-bad movement. Okay? It's just all over the lot. And we're not talking to each other, and we're not sharing information. And if you take something like poverty, let's take poverty in County X of State Y. There's 100 different government organizations doing anti-poverty stuff, sometimes in conflict with each other. And there's these do-good organizations doing anti-poverty stuff, sometimes in conflict with each other. I have a vision one day for a global range of gifts table. This is what the foundations call, you know, the range of gifts is naming rights for the building or the toilet paper or whatever. I anticipate a day when it will be possible to identify the needs down to the household level of every family on the planet. And at that point, we will start seeing peer-to-peer foreign assistance. And we will start seeing the creation of new forms of community. It turned off on me. Let me get it back up because this is a fun slide. So the short answer is all of the above. You've got to do everything all the time. My third book was called All Information, All Languages, All the Time. And one of the problems that I have with the entire information industry is that it's trying to pretend that, A, you need proprietary enterprise solutions, which this group certainly knows you don't. It's trying to pretend that there is a technical alternative to thinking, which there isn't. It's trying to pretend that structured hierarchy, that man behind you wants the microphone. It's trying to pretend that structured organizations and command and control architectures are, this thing went to sleep on me. This is a good deal, by the way. Dell 750 with XP. Dell is the only one that broke ranks because I told the Undersecretary General of the United Nations, the Director of OMB, and the Director of National Intelligence, as soon as I heard about Vista about a year and a half ago, I sent them each an email. And I said, don't let anybody buy Vista. And they ignored me. And so today, across campuses across America, kids are tearing their hair out thinking their parents are stupid. What the hell's wrong with this thing?
What you can do is just install Vista on all those machines and tell people it's, or install Ubuntu and tell them it's Vista.
Why have you tried to install a program or a driver?
Well, yeah, exactly. No, what I did was I called around and I went to Best Buy. They were locked into Vista. They weren't even allowed to ship without Vista. Dell was the only one that broke ranks. Dell, I said, I'm not buying this unless it's got XP on it. And I'm still waiting for an easy open source combination.
Dell now sells it with Ubuntu, actually.
Really, that's good. That's very good. That's a good start. But the next thing we need is all the analytic tools. And I'm trying to figure out why the hell this damn thing won't turn on.
I'd like to really see, and I'm sending it out there.
Wait. You're not using the microphone. No, he's got a question. No, you got to stop.
I was going to go in a different direction than laptops.
Okay, go ahead.
Question for you. A number of years ago, coming out of high school, I tested the. I went through the ASVAB. Tested pretty high. I think everybody in the room probably would. And they're like, well, what do you want to do? You want to go through boot camp? You want to come out and do military intelligence? I'm like, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, but my ethics are I don't want to be a war maker. Is there a role for peacemakers in the armed forces?
Yes. In fact, Colonel Ferd Irizarry is the first active duty colonel ever assigned to run an active duty civil affairs brigade. He's General Schoomaker's last gift to America was to create the Army Civil Affairs Brigade. It has a battalion for each region, and it is under the oversight of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict / irregular warfare. That's Army code. Irregular warfare is Army code for waging peace. Okay? And Colonel Irizarry and I have had a number of wonderful conversations because
screen. I don't know.
what we've realized is that, an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. The problem is, what the hell's going on here? Here, you take it. Well, wait. Oh, I see. I just can't see. Okay. Okay, I'm with you now. So why can't I? No? Okay, you guys want to play Pong? Okay, fuck you too, machine. All right, this is Gates. All right, we'll get it back. We'll get it back because I have some cool slides. All right, go ahead.
Okay, but I'll read the computer thing. What I'd really like to see, and I know it's kind of there, but not for most people, would be a version of a Linux-based OS that looks and feels reasonably pleasant, but also lets you install stuff without being a total Linux geek.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. If you want, we'll talk more about civil affairs. But the future, I believe. In fact, I lectured to parliamentarians in Europe at Parmesan at the George Parmesan, whatever, at the George Marshall Center, and I talked about having a core force. Colin Powell's base force was a force for war. The core force is communications, unclassified intelligence, and global mobility. It's the infrastructure. And what is happening now is that the rest of the U.S. government can't mobilize. The cabinet departments are not geared up to send people to Somalia or to Burundi or whatever. And so what I see happening here is, over time, I anticipate a white hat military that becomes the core force so that, for example, when East Timor happened, question number one was, where are the bodies? Question number two was, where can we land? And question number three was, who's coming with what? And how do we coordinate with them? And nobody could answer that. There were like 40 different intelligence analysis groups working on this problem. I anticipate the day coming when something like the tsunami in Thailand happens, and the military literally is there in 6 hours with the first team and then second team, third team piled on, and they become the command. They become not the command and control club, the information sharing and sense-making hub, and the final coordinator for logistics. And everybody coming into the area feeds in what they're bringing and when and how and who to talk to, and they all come in and they use Toozle, T-O-O-Z-L. I'm going to go pick up a couple of files. I'd love for you guys to take Toozle on and put it on steroids, because Toozle is a set of tools that fit on a thumb drive that can immediately have you up and running within a local area network anywhere in the world. So DARPA funded this under Strong Angel, and it's definitely cool. So civil affairs is where I think the future is going to be in terms of waging peace. And we're all going to have to be very active as citizens, because the reality is, when I signed up to pay taxes, I didn't sign up to have my taxes directed toward waging war. That's where Ron Paul really shines, peaceful commerce with all nations. And I think over time we need to do this. Is there a way for me to get back my own screen? Function. All right, now I took it away. Okay, good. There we go. Come on. There we go. Okay, good. I'm going to bring up the briefing I gave earlier. It's got a couple of good slides in it. And see, with Earth Intelligence Network, what I've been trying to do was create a frame of reference for citizens to talk to. We also have this idea of a policy budget outreach online thing. So that the idea here is that with volunteer labor, every single budget at every level, the national budget, you guys can all go to the National Online Simulation. The problem with the National Online Simulation is, although you can create my budget, you can't enter into dialogue with everybody else. Because what you really want to be able to do is create my budget. I'm a libertarian from zip code 22124, And then that allows you to immediately see the aggregate budget distinctions between all libertarians, Republicans, Democrats, and others. And then it allows you to go into an open space and talk about trade-offs in relation to actual constraints on resources. Go down here. 'Cause I love this slide. My son made this.
Well, you mentioned resources. Do you notice any similarities between the current energy crisis, oil crisis, and I guess the electric crisis California had?
Hold on. That was just pure corruption. Here's Tuzla, which I recommend to all of you. It would be a really cool project to take on Tuzla and make it a, like he says, an easy-to-use tool that allows for, hang on, let's see, where is my, this was this morning's brief. Okay, I think I've got a slide of analytic toolkits here. There. Okay. In 1986, Diane Webb, a redhead 4 foot off the deck, thought of this. Only she thought of it in the old way, the pyramidal way. And these are all of the technology aids that we need on a standard citizen's desktop. I mean, the ones at the top are ingestion and conversion capabilities. The ones in the middle are modeling, simulation, visualization, anomaly detection, and so forth. Well, that's actually down in the second link. And then finally, the last one is sharing and sense-making among peers. We don't have this today. We don't have this today because Bill Gates has been migrating and mutating his application program interfaces to discourage innovation on the edge of the network. We don't have this today because Google doesn't want you to know that they're stealing everything they touch, and they want you to have their analytics in their own good time. Okay? I think Grub, distributed search, that's all possible. In my view, when we create information, if we had Cisco AON, application-oriented network, it's a form of content-based management and control. You can change rules in a nanosecond worldwide. But basically, your computer should have a Cisco AON outlet or something like it. You should be able to control your own information. You should be able to determine who sees what. You should be able to audit who sees what. You should be part of a global distributed network where the information resides permanently in your server, nowhere else. It's not mirrored. It's got digital watermarks, the whole bit. We should have had this 20 years ago. I was on the original Advanced Information Application Program Steering Group, and we inventoried the entire intelligence community. We found out that there were over 20 analytic desktop projects. And each of them was a different part of the intelligence community with a different vendor with whom they had a sweetheart relationship with. And none of them had standards. None of them had even done a functional requirements analysis. I may be one of the only people on the planet that's actually done an end-to-end functional requirements analysis for an analytic workstation at CIA. And I think it's posted on my website. So this is what we need in open source software. So we need Tuzla to be able to do all of this. And also there have to be back-end and reach-back centers. One of my dreams is to persuade the Chinese and the Indians that they need to put homework help on steroids and basically have a national call center. They hand out free cell phones, first to every village, then to every neighborhood, then to every household, like Gillette. You sell the shave, not the razor. So give away the cell phone, monetize the analytics. How cool is it if 16 different farmers call in with a disease, a picture of a disease, and your call center has that plotted? Or how cool is it if 17 people call in with symptoms of SARS? I mean, what we're talking about here is turning the cell phone into the national planet pulse taker. And I think that's where Nokia is going. Nokia is very, very smart. They've got this one guy that, what a dream job. He travels all over the world taking photos of people in their natural habitats. And what he's thinking about is how can a cell phone change the way this person does business? And that was precisely the point I was trying to make to Interval in 1993. I was invited to give a Friday afternoon rant, and the title of it, which is online, it's God, Man, and Interval. And what I was saying was, if you can't change the life of an Indian woman with a child, you're shit. And instead, they were into holograms and all this other stuff. Let me see if I've got the Epoch B slide up here. This is kind of cool. I think the tide is turning. I think we will be, oh, here we go. This is also known as Epoch B leadership. The problem with McCain and Obama is they haven't learned to listen. They haven't learned to ask the right question. And I tried to help Obama, and then I tried to help McCain. And in McCain's case, I mean, I think McCain's strongest point is he's the only guy that has the stature to basically cut the military in half. And that's something we need to do. I mean, we have to cut the military in half. Who is talking about taking out Iran?
So you can't do both.
No, you're right, but you also, the gentleman says that McCain's talking about taking out Iran. You know, at the end of the day, Iran is not a threat to the United States of America. What's that? The fucking Persians. I'm not being disrespectful, and I hope you know that. All right. So let's say that we have to decide between two village idiots. Well, I'd like that, but Bloomberg won't talk to me. So, I mean, Bloomberg sent me a thank you note, or his staff sent me a thank you note. But I actually put together a binder on Democracy 2008. I've worked with some really smart guys since 2000 to identify. Would you guys like to see a nonpartisan cabinet? Yes? Okay. Then, but this slide here captures what we're about. I love Noam Chomsky. In fact, I'm his replacement. You know, Chomsky got it. Manufacturing, consent. I mean, he really got it long before the rest of us did. But I don't have tenure anywhere. So let me close this down, and I'll bring up the transpartisan cabinet. And, you know, I've been thinking about this since 2000. And I've been working with Michael Cudahy, who was the campaign manager for Barry Goldwater. And I've been working with Jock Gill, who was a communicator for President Clinton, and a whole bunch of other people. And we've come up with a Democracy 2008. This was stuff that I sent to Bloomberg. And it's all available, generally online. But here's a coalition cabinet. Now, I don't think I can make this any bigger, can I? Control plus? Okay, there we go. Control plus. Hold on. I got to find the plus. All right. Control what? Oh, like... Yes, I do.
Reboot the computer.
Yes! This is a good idea. Somebody come up here and handle this. Did everybody get a pen? Who didn't get a pen?
Do you have a mouse?
No, I don't have a mouse.
Oh, where did you?
Oh, there. Oh, wow.
And then you can use your...
Yeah, new trick. Okay. I will leave it there because what really matters is just this column right here. But let me give you my email, because if you find that we've overlooked somebody, I would be very, very glad to have an email to Bear, B-E-A-R, @oss.net, and in the subject line put HOPE in capital letters as the first word, and I'll be sure to see it. I'd love to have your thoughts on this. But basically, what we did was we put together a slate that was intended to be nonpartisan, And so you have Jim Hightower at Agriculture, Clyde Prestowitz at Commerce, with John Bogle, Sam Nunn at Defense. Well, my view is that no one should be elected president in the future unless they have first announced their cabinet, or at least, you know, a partial cabinet, and second, published a balanced budget of where they intend to take the country. Okay? Because right now we're voting for demagogues with pretentious platitudes that are not backed up by reality.
You going to keep the Department of Homeland Security?
I'd like to get rid of it. I actually have in my article on presidential strategy, my chapter on presidential strategy in my first book, I believe we need 2 deputy vice presidents. A deputy vice president for national security who oversees justice, state, and defense together, and a deputy vice president for the Commonwealth who oversees everything else. I also believe we need to change the National Council to create a presidential policy staff. And I have a concept for a Director General for Policy, a Director General for Strategy, which we don't have. The world's longest job description was written by David Abshire. It was called Preventing World War III, and it was a book-length position description for a position of Counsel to the President for Strategy. But I've gone much further than that and thought about how you actually put strategy co-equal with policy, intelligence, and research. So education, Derek Bach; energy, Paul Hawken; Tom Cochran; Stephen Flynn for the time being, but I think, as you say, Homeland Security needs to be phased out, and what we really need to do is think about how do you leverage the Commonwealth, and how do you organize by people, by natural resources, and so forth. Constanza Green, Philip Heyman, Robert Hutner, Colin Powell at State. I think Colin Powell should be either Vice President or return to Secretary of State. John Claybrook, Felix Royatin, or someone else, Max Cleland, and then Ambassador to Israel, Jonathan Schnell, who wrote the book Unconquerable World, David Gergen, he's got another job left in him. Mike Hayden, I'm sorry, I have to get him off the list. He's violated the Constitution twice, once with warrantless wiretapping, although the gentleman pointed out in the other session that that's been done since time immemorial, and the second time with rendition. Jim Clapper is a good man, Cockburn, Pat Buchanan. So there you have it. And, you know, this doesn't have to, I mean, I love Carol Moseley Brown. I think she's really a hot lady. Don't go there.
That's why you picked her over Kucinich?
You know, if Kucinich would wash his hair and wear boots, he might do a little better. But nobody in America is going to elect a guy with greasy hair who looks like a runt, no matter how smart he is. Huh? I don't know his wife. I don't know his wife. Do we want lights back or leave them off? Okay, lights are off. You can sleep if you want. Quick time check. It's 3:29. Let's agree that we do end at 4. And then I've been told I need to sign books both here and downstairs. So any more questions? With the microphone. Or shall we just stop?
I have one.
Yes, I'm
you know-
listening.
It's a little different. Do you have any knowledge of a project in Alaska with a field of satellite dishes or
The one that's trying to control the weather?
yeah, ripping a hole in the ionosphere? Do you have any information
Well,
on
there
that?
is a project in Alaska that's really pissing the Chinese and the Russians off. I forget the detailed name. It's got an H in there. HARP? Yeah, HARP. Right, HARP. H. 2 A's. H-A-A-R-P. Okay. I've read about it. And all I can say is that the arrogance and ignorance of the U.S. government is just absolutely, utterly astounding. And I think it's a really bad idea. I think it needs to be publicized. You know, when I said earlier that I think we need a voice to America, there's a real problem here because the government wants to consider you a traitor if you're willing to listen to other people or to collaborate with other people to get the truth out. What's that?
Especially if they're foreign.
Yeah, especially if they're foreign, especially if they're Venezuelan. Well, the fact of the matter is that Will and Ariel Durant in Lessons of History, which was the capstone volume on their 10 to 12 volume History of Civilization, said that morality is a strategic asset that is priceless. Basically, morality and legitimacy are what allow you to lower the cost of doing business and to optimize the degree to which you can achieve peace and prosperity at the lowest possible cost. And the United States has gotten into a series of political administrations who are shameless. I mean, there's a book called The Trial of Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger murdered 20,000 American soldiers by undermining the Paris peace talks so that Nixon could win, only to accept precisely the same terms 4 years later. One of the concepts that I have is for retrospective impeachments. And I don't mean to impeach in order to punish as much as to warn the current players. We should be impeaching every senator that was a party to ignoring peak oil. We should be impeaching every senator today who is refusing to address our water issues. We should be impeaching every senator today who declines to institute electoral reform. It may be too late for this go-around. I personally think McCain will win. I personally think Obama lost me when he rejected the Reverend. Because when the Reverend said, "God damn America," apart from the fact that he was exercising his right of free speech, he was in fact addressing the sucking chest wound in our nation. He was addressing the fact that America is at its weakest when it is at its worst. I didn't know that. Thank you. The gentleman says that he was quoting an American ambassador. So the bottom line here is the Reverend was on solid ground, and when Obama had it right the first time when he said I could no more reject the Reverend than I could reject my white mother. And then he blew it. He blew it. So HAARP needs to be shut down. And in fact, one of the, there's a scientific principle more honored in the breach than in reality, but it's called the precautionary principle. We, and Charles Perrow wrote a book called Living with High-Risk Technologies, and stop me if I've said this too many times, but simple systems have single points of failure that are easy to diagnose and easy to fix. Complex systems have multiple points of failure that interact in unpredictable ways on the way down and are very, very difficult to fix. We live in a society, a constellation of complex systems, all built by the lowest bidder. Okay, so we're in really, really bad trouble. Another question on the microphone.
Okay, it's not really a question, but a comment, but I guess it turns into a question. This whole business with McCain versus Obama, I'll tell you, why do I just get the feeling we're dealing with the old bucket of buzzard puke story, so to speak? It's like which one to take a big drink out of because they're both about equally
because
bad.
they both represent the two evil parties that are trying to shut out all the other parties and all the other thoughts. I agree.
But the other thing is, even with that, for some stupid reason, I still can't shake the thought that Obama, with all his faults, and they're there, still seems to be the lesser of the two evils. Now, maybe that's incorrect. I have trouble getting my head around a Republican being a better choice in general, even though it means less than it used to.
Yeah,
admittedly.
no, I share your pain. The reality. The problem that I have with Obama, I mean, I'm 56 years old. And
I'm 45, not that much younger.
Yeah, no, I know, but I've seen rubes come and go.
Yeah.
And Obama, unfortunately, I think he hit it before his time.
That's probably true.
And I will tell you, I got in my car and I drove to Des Moines. How many of you have already heard this story? All right, just a couple. I'll tell you the story. I drove to Des Moines because I believed in Obama's possibilities at the very beginning. And I drove to Des Moines, then I went to his state office, and I tried to get them to pay attention to me, and I pointed out to them I just spent $30,000 trying to get him some higher profile with the media in Illinois, and they blew me off. So I went to the hotel,
fairly easy to identify, the Campaign Hotel, and I was trying to check in, and they said, "I'm sorry, we're literally sold out." And it was a woman of color. And so I said to her, I said, "You know, I'm here to try and help Obama, but his staff isn't paying attention to me. He's not reaching out." I mean, he was, for a while there, he was mentioning independents, and he never, ever mentioned libertarians or Greens or reforms. And so I said, "I'm here, I'm trying to get through to him, but his staff won't listen. I'm trying to get to him directly." She said, "Just wait a minute." And she went and she put me in one of the two rooms blocked by the Secret Service on each side of Obama's room. And she didn't tell me that she was doing this, but I'm no idiot. I get into my room and I look around, and there's a room right across from me where the door is cracked. It's held open by a handkerchief. And no one's looking through the crack, but it's clear to me there are a couple of guys parked in there. I say, okay, that's the Secret Service room. This is my room. That's Obama's room. Okay? And so then I went down to the business center, and I started preparing a memorandum for him. And by coincidence, a man of color who was on the Secret Service detail was in there also. I said, "Oh, you're with the Secret Service?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, well, I came here to slip something under Obama's door," which he's supposed to prevent. And I said, "Here's a copy. And here's my Social Security number." And I said, "I'm in the room right next door, and I'm planning to do this later tonight." And he didn't say anything. He certainly did not give me approval, but it was clearly understood. And so later that night, Secret Service never noticed. Could have been a bomb I put under his door. But I put this memo under his door. And he may have glanced at it, but Obama is literally a prisoner of both a campaign staff and a political party, as well as whatever skeletons he has in his Chicago closet. And Obama is, at this point, I believe, what reverends of color have said, a House Negro. And he's making the same mistake that Colin Powell made when he allowed Dick Cheney to run roughshod over American foreign policy. And Powell confused loyalty with integrity. So, in my view, Obama has a bright future only if he finds his own voice and only if he separates himself from Dr. Strangeloves like Brzezinski. Brzezinski's the guy that gave us Carter. Okay? Brzezinski's the guy that gave the Pakistanis the nuclear bomb. Brzezinski's the guy that's been brain dead for the last 10 years. Okay? And Obama knows nothing about foreign policy. He doesn't have... I gave him this structure. I slipped this structure under his door. I said, memorize the 10 threats, memorize the 12 policies, and you'll win this in a walk. And I was blown off by Obama, by David Plouffe, by Axelrod, and by Oprah Winfrey. What's that? The short answer is I'm not sure. In McCain's case, I may go to him personally on the Hill. I faxed it. McCain began to shine. I thought McCain's speech to the NAACP was the first time he really sounded presidential and thoughtful and reasonable. I thought he actually outdid Obama in that particular body. But McCain's problem is that he's surrounded by a small cadre of staff that have come up with him from the Arizona days, that he's comfortable with, that he trusts. I guarantee none of these people are reading books. None of these people have multiple graduate degrees. None of these people have spent their life living overseas. None of these people have ever experienced poverty. None of these people has a strategic framework for analysis. None of these people is capable of reaching out to David Walker and say, hey, McCain needs a balanced budget tomorrow. Yes, sir. On the microphone. Microphone here and then over there. Go ahead.
This is more a suggestion than anything else. Taking his comment and what he said, if we know that the candidates really suck and we really shouldn't be voting for them, why are we voting for them? Why don't we vote for somebody else? Get rid of the brand loyalty and just vote for somebody else.
Who?
Anybody. Doesn't matter. Enough to say we're done with Republican, done with Democrat. We need somebody else.
Right now the system is stacked. Right now the system is stacked. If you don't vote, all you're doing is guaranteeing that one of them will win with someone else's vote.
I'm not saying not to vote. I'm saying vote for somebody else.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Show that there's interest in, Nader. I'm not a big fan of Nader. Cynthia McKinney's my chick.
No, I agree with you, and I'm going to have to go to the bathroom in a few minutes. But
if I'm... Yeah, now look, Bloomberg is on the right track, but I flew to Oklahoma to watch Bloomberg be made a fool of by David Boren and the others. They had this so-called bipartisan meeting there, and I flew there and I managed to penetrate the press corps, and I basically got CNN and CBS and a couple of others to understand that bipartisan is the opposite of transpartisan. Okay, transpartisan is the leftist term, nonpartisan is the moderate rightist term. But I was told that in the private press conference before the public one, several people asked him, hey, you know, this is bipartisan, two parties, what about transpartisan, all the parties? And there was no answer. And Bloomberg sat there on the stage, and I've published a memorandum on this, which is online, about Bloomberg being made a fool of in Oklahoma. Basically, you had the David Boren show, and with the exception of Sam Nunn and Bloomberg, everybody there was a has-been, including Cohen. Okay? Going back to the comment about Obama, if Obama is elected, he will be castrated from day one with respect to national security. He'll end up trying to bring in someone like Sam Nunn, and people are just going to go through the motions, and he is going to be stonewalled every way he goes. He is going to end up finding out that he's got to pick one domestic thing and do that, and he's not going to change the system. McCain may be the same. In my personal view, and I had a slide in there, I would be thrilled if Bloomberg would say that he was not going to run for president, but that he was going to launch a nationwide effort so that his chosen representative would participate in every single one of the presidential debates, and Bloomberg should field a People's Sunshine Cabinet, and that Sunshine Cabinet, working under webcams and online, should create a balanced budget that the people can discuss. And we should do all of this beginning 1 September and ending no later than 15 October. If Bloomberg would pay for that, he will do what Lou Dobbs will never do. He will raise the level of the debate. He will make everybody conscious of all of the issues. He will make these two guys realize what fools they are.
It's the Perot ticket.
Huh?
It's what Ross Perot did. He paid for his own advertising.
No, Ross, yeah, but no, excuse me. Ross Perot was about Ross Perot.
Right.
Ross Perot had no strategy. He had no policy panel. He had no balanced budget. All Ross Perot wanted to do was be Ross Perot. And he was able to hire the two best political consultants on both sides of the aisle, and they both quit because Ross Perot wouldn't listen. Well, neither does Ralph Nader. Okay? So right now, the dark horse in all of this is Bloomberg. And Bloomberg is reputed to have said with absolute fervor he's not going to run. Why should he run? I mean, it's a shit job. You know, and the fact that George Bush can fill it demonstrates that it's a shit job. He's a joke. All right, listen, I want to stop here. I'm going to go to the bathroom, and then I think when I come back, I'd like to sign the books that need to be signed up here, and then they want me to go downstairs. Is that all right with you guys? All right, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Bye-bye. And God bless America, right or wrong.
I have one question.
We can get back to America the Beautiful.
I'd like to see it in my lifetime.
Yes, I would too. I'd like to see it in my children's lifetime. Did everybody get a pin? All right, my pleasure. What's that? Yeah. Does anyone have a book that needs to be signed? Okay. Come on up. I'm going to go to the bathroom. I'll come back, and then I'll go downstairs. It happened in stages. It got worse than that.
closing.